No, this meeting is being conducted remotely via Zoom webinar with 10 school committee members for our remote participation policy, BEDJA. Diane Baum is absent. Public participation is possible via the Zoom link or call-in phone number. Our school committee meetings are also live streamed on YouTube, although public participation is not possible with that option. The link, phone number, and YouTube link are found on the posted agenda on the abschools.org calendar. This meeting is also being recorded and will be posted on ActonTV's website at actontv.org. For our remote policy, all votes will be done by roll call. I will call each member's name and they will state how they vote. Thank you all for joining us. All right, we have a busy meeting tonight. Everyone's been super busy doing all the things that we've been doing at home. The annual spring town elections are going to be held in both towns on June 2nd. Citizens are being urged to vote early by mail to avoid gathering at the polls. Please see your town website for details. Boxborough annual town meeting will be held June 22nd at the Boxborough Regency, and Acton town meeting will be held June 29th. This is the time in our meeting where we have public participation. So use the raise hand feature if you would like to participate. Please do not use the chat function. Don't see anyone raising their hands, although I do see that we have some of our high school representatives here. So, Charles, you are raising your hand.
Charles is?
Yeah.
All right.
All right. Well, hello, everyone. I think my update today will be focused on the smoothness of the current schedule. Right now, I think that with the organized schedule with all of the high school students, I think that everything is running at a much smoother pace. And I'd also say that complaints about distance learning are at somewhat of a minimum. That being said, I think that teachers and other adults, and not only the high school but also the district, you deserve some recognition, because I think it's pretty hard to manage your own workflow. Yet teachers are consistently striving to help their students improve. So, for example, in preparation for the remote ABRSC history exam, my teacher assigned a practice document-based question, and afterwards she took time to give each one of her 100 plus students she took some time to give each one of her 100 plus students some feedback, and I think that this helped immensely in terms of making students aware of what areas they needed to work on the most. So I think, to sum it up, teachers play a big role in the coherence of this hiatus, and I think most, if not all of my peers, would like to give them a big thank you.
Great. Thank you, Charles. We appreciate the update, and I agree. Things have been running really smoothly, and our educators have gone above and beyond for their students, and I've heard that at every level. I saw that Michael was here too. Michael, did you have anything additional that you wanted to add?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to echo Charles' point, and I guess I want to maybe say, like, something I want to note is that, like, the teachers are taking a lot of feedback on how to make Zoom learning functional and how to make it a better experience going into next year. There's been a lot of surveys this week, since the last week of seniors, just around sort of what worked, what didn't work. One suggestion that's been made a lot is for students to keep their cameras on during class. And so teachers have taken that advice and other pieces of advice around how to structure their classes and are really trying to put that effort in to try to make the experience work, since this crisis doesn't seem to be ending anytime soon. And I just want to sort of, also speaking as a senior, recognize and appreciate the outpouring of support for the senior class that's been sort of from our community and from teachers, parents, and project graduation, and just all the different parts of our community that have come together to make this senior year special for all of us. And I just wanted to say thank you to them. And finally, a quick technical note. I don't believe we have not had any class elections since the pandemic. So as far as I can tell, Charles, Rishi, and we will still, maybe even me, although I've graduated, so I'll be awkward, we'll still be your reps heading into the fall. and potentially the winter. I don't know how that will work necessarily, but I still have not been relieved of my duties.
Great. Thank you for the update, Michael. We will be happy to have you with us as long as you choose to attend school committee meetings. So
Thank you.
we appreciate your service that everyone has done, and you guys have done a great job this year attending and keeping us informed of all the good and the bad going on at the high school. And I think it's been really a helpful perspective for all of us to be able to gain, especially when we're all far apart like this. It's great to be able to hear students' perspective on the distance learning, especially the students who are probably doing much of it themselves when the rest of us may have children at home that are still quite dependent on us as teachers. So it's good to hear that it's going well. I really appreciate your input and feedback, and thank you for attending tonight.
Thank you for having us.
Okay, so the next part of the meeting is presentations, and Peter is going to give us an update on school closure.
Sure. I'll just start by saying, congratulations, Michael. I know this probably isn't the way you had intended to end the school year, but nonetheless, congratulations. We definitely all wish you the best. And I'll just echo, what you said, but I'll expand that to all of our parent organizations and school organizations, because I think what we've seen is our community is really going to, extraordinary lengths to not only honor all of our seniors, but also our other students who are, ending time at the elementary schools, changing levels, and just trying to, even if it's not the experiences our students thought they'd be having at this point in the year, trying to make them special for kids. So thank you to all of our community organizations for all of their work. I'm going to share my screen with you to give you a brief update just on our thinking around the planning process for reopening schools. This is obviously a complex process, and it has been ongoing work to be able to do that. So hopefully you're all seeing a slideshow reopening our schools. You will note the children in this picture are not socially distant. However, it's because it's not fall yet. So we'll be working on that. So if you recall back about a month ago, District Management Group came and presented an overview of their findings around social emotional learning and how we can bolster that programming. After that happened, because they recognized all districts were closed around the country, they actually launched an initiative to begin helping districts think about a planning framework for reentry. And so I just want to, give a shout out to District Management Group, because many of the ideas that are included in this framework were in consultation with them, but then went through, multiple meetings of vetting with our leadership teams in order to be able to get to the point that we're presenting to you today. I saw this picture online and I thought it was very appropriate to the times, and really captures kind of the emotion of what I think a lot of us thinking about school in the fall are feeling. I don't think I need to say a lot about it. I think it probably speaks for itself. I could probably say about 1,000 words. But to put it in perspective, the school closure was really the tip of the iceberg. We have been closed for what feels like a prolonged period of time, but in the larger scope of this pandemic, 3 months probably is a very short period of time. And so as we begin to think about what now needs to happen, we're really digging in to the yeoman's part of this work. So, we know that we're going to be taking a significant look at school structures, that we have to think about lost learning for our students. We have to think about their social emotional needs coming back in. And that really is probably, the greatest work that we're going to be doing in most of our educational careers. Just to give a little perspective on what we know we are planning to teach students in the fall. We know that the health crisis will still be ongoing. We have received some preliminary guidance along the way. The CDC has released recommendations. We see, some promising practices coming out of multiple other countries I think around 11 have opened at this point. Massachusetts released its plan for reopening. But what we've heard so far are really big picture items, and they have not been granular to a level that we could implement operationally. However, when we look at everything that's out there, all signs are pointing that we will be significantly modifying our processes to include, distancing and certainly taking, quite a few health measures that need to be in place to reopen. We also know that coming back, students will have varying educational needs, and some may need significant support. The good news is we now have some experience under our belt with distance learning. So I'm calling that version 1.0. And then if you recall, we received some additional guidance for DESE, and we sought some feedback from stakeholders, and we then released version 1.1, which was kind of a modified version of that. Additional guidance is something that, we worked with district management group around implementing, and I'm actually meeting with multiple other superintendents along with district management group to see if there's a way of collaborating a little bit across districts so that as we develop practices, we can share those and vet them in order to understand the impact of the decisions we're making along the way. Essentially what we're doing is we're forming 4 planning groups to be able to do this work, and I'll start at the top right. The first planning group is focused on the instructional core and social emotional learning. The instructional core is an educational term that we use to refer to basically what teaching and learning embodies, which is the intersection of students, teachers, and content or curriculum. So one planning group will be thinking about students, teachers, content, and curriculum, our teaching and learning process, and embedding social emotional learning as a primary construct of all of that. The second group will be looking at district operations and taking a look, and school operations, I should say, and really taking a look at how are we going to manage students coming and going from our campuses? What are the health protocols that we need to have in place in order to operate effectively? What do we need to do to clean our campuses on a daily basis? How will we bring students to school? How will people arrive at the school, check in? How will they get dismissed? What will extended day and childcare look like? All the way through what happens with athletics, clubs, and performances. Another element I'm going to come to is human resources and finance, because we know that the support of all of this work is going to be absolutely critical. We need to make sure that we understand who our essential staff are. There's going to be contractual elements that we have to look at, including evaluation next year. Benefits for staff absences are certainly at the forefront of our minds, because if neighboring districts have to be closed or neighboring schools have to be closed for a period of time, and our staff have to provide childcare for their own families, that becomes a consideration for us as a school. We also have to think about food service in all of this, as well as all the financial and resource allocations that embody supporting that effectively. And then finally, the fourth subgroup of all of this is really focused on stakeholders and communication, because without effective engagement of all of our stakeholders and a really well thought out plan for communication, we're not going to be able to effectively launch and allay a lot of the anxiety and fear that people are feeling around returning to school. So that group will focus on appropriate channels of communication, getting stakeholder feedback on our plans to inform how we're planning for the fall, thinking about how we mitigate public concerns, thinking about family education, and then also focusing on interagency collaboration. How can we use our broader community to support the needs of our students? In the center of all of this, I think we're actually very well situated to respond to a pandemic from our values standpoint. We have 3 core values, which are wellness, equity, and engagement. And those will suit us well because each one of those is going to be critical for how we bring our students back. And then finally, the gray area here kind of represents the ecosystem that we can't control. We have no control over public health. However, we need to take a public health informed approach to how we choose to re-enter. And every decision we make along the way needs to be informed by the public health measures that are in place. The fifth and final committee that we will have is a steering committee, which will be comprised of members from each of our 4 committees, as well as 1 or 2 other members at large. The purpose of the steering committee is to ensure that there's coherence among the 4 different working groups that will be working on this, as well as alignment with our core values, and particularly equity. We need to make sure that equity is a foundational planning element of everything we do as we return to school. Thinking about planning structures, there's different ways that we can go about planning for new things to come. A traditional school planning structure is typically a 12 to 18 month plan that we put in place, where we start by identifying a goal about something that we want to improve. We then form a very large team, typically, that includes stakeholders from every possible corner of the earth. And we sit down for about 12 to 18 months. We look at all of the research. We look at best practices. We listen to stakeholders at every step of the way. And then ultimately we launch something. And after launch, it's fairly typical in most schools and districts that once you launch a product or some new initiative, you actually aren't really thinking about changing that very often. You implement a new math program, you're not looking to change that immediately once you implement. You've studied it a long time, made informed decisions. I think in thinking about a return to school and the number of new elements that have to be considered and the time that we have to make these changes in, there are some challenges in the current environment. First, time is very limited. We are returning in about 100 days. We know that what we know about COVID is rapidly changing, as a variety of the responses that seem to be effective. The size of planning teams tends to be inversely related to the ability of that team to be nimble. So if you need to make quick decisions and you have a team of 20, it's very unlikely you're going to make fast progress on a lot of issues, just simply because the size of the team slows the process down. And also, a traditional planning process tends to assume that once a solution is implemented, planning then is done. So as we thought about the process that we wanted to implement, we had some considerations. First, we want to move at a fast pace. Second, we need to respond to rapidly changing information and circumstances. Every week we get new information, and somehow between now and September, we need to incorporate all of that. Finally, we need a plan that recognizes that this is going to be an iterative process, and the solution may not be perfect that we implement the first time, but we have to plan solutions that meet all of our needs in the moment. We have to be able to solicit feedback and continually incorporate that new information. And the idea is that even after first implementation, we will continue to improve all of our work because the circumstances are going to change and it's going to require improvements. The best analogy I can give you is the difference between planning for a release of Windows 95 and planning for a release of an iPhone app now. When they planned Windows 95, it was multiple years in the making. They released it, and then it was largely unchanged for a long period of time. And when we plan telephone apps now, we release them when they're right, but then every week we're seeing a new update to that, and we're constantly revising the process. So we're taking that different approach in how we plan for reentry. We're using an agile planning process, and so at the initiation of that, what that means is we need to gather our current public health information, we need to inform that with promising practices, and we need to solicit some information from our stakeholders about their hopes and fears about coming back. We then will sort that into our working groups, and each working group will have a set of prioritized tasks. Working groups will be largely responsible for planning how we respond to coming back, but that's informed by a steering committee. Our working groups will be working bi-weekly with the idea that each week those working groups will report out on topics to a steering committee who will help to test and validate the various solutions and to ensure they're aligned and coherent with our values. We intend between now and the fall to go through multiple processes of kind of research, brainstorming, and coming up with solutions and then validating them to make sure that what we're doing in the fall has been well thought out and is flexible. We're kind of adopting the mantra as we come into this in the fall that the perfect may be the enemy of the good. Our overall project timeline, we're saying it's actually a 200-day process, which actually gets us to about New Year's next year. The reason we're calling it a 200-day process is we know that whatever we implement when we come back in the fall will not be the final version of what needs to happen. We know that COVID is likely to change the dynamics at play between fall and January, and we need to respond to that. So as I said earlier in the presentation, we do have experience with distance learning. We've already gone through 2 iterations. So we're calling that versions 1.0 and 1.1. As we kick off that process, our thinking is that when we come back in the fall, we're now onto version 2.0. We have the experience. We know that circumstances are changing, and we're planning that new release of that. And then we will continue to improve that over time. One thing we don't know is when things will get back to normal from an educational perspective. I wish I could give you that date, but I don't think anyone knows that at this point. Our working groups, I just want to give you a brief overview of the different groups that we're thinking about engaging through this process. The core of a working group is going to be 6 to 8 members, and it is largely comprised of our leadership across our schools and districts. But our plan is to, at different times, reach out and engage different stakeholder groups who need to be a piece of that planning process. So what we're thinking is that the working group that meets 2 times a week would be a smaller group, but then there are opportunities along the way when they take up different topics to then invite stakeholders into the meeting, reach out and survey stakeholders, seek feedback from different stakeholder groups, and be able to then incorporate that. But because of the nature of the topics that we're planning for are so wide and varying, there's no need to have 10 of 20 people on a committee sitting through meetings that don't necessarily pertain to what they need to give feedback for. So that's how we chose to do this. Just to give you a sense, so when we're talking about instructional core and SEL, we'll certainly be talking with our district admin, school admin, curriculum coordinators, special education, and counseling departments, but we also need to reach out and make sure that we're getting our education educators and union leadership involved in that planning process as well. You can see the school and district operations is slightly different in terms of the needs. We've added nursing staff in because they're going to be a critical planner along with us in the composition of that team. For the stakeholder group, we have some core members, but then we also want to make sure that we have an opportunity to engage some of our parent organizations, including CPAC, at different times, some of our PTOs, in giving us some feedback on how this all plays out. And then from a human resources and finance standpoint, again, there's a core group that is primarily administrative on this, but based on the topic at hand, they will be reaching out and engaging different stakeholders in the planning process. Finally, the steering committee, as I said, our committees are rather small, but this is one, actually there's two opportunities specific to school committee that we want to do. Stakeholders and communication is really important to us. Because I think that school committee plays a primary role in being a liaison between our community and our school district. And so I am looking for, one school committee representative to be on that group. And then the other one, and I apologize, this actually should be a darker blue color on school committee on this, not to get everyone excited and then be disappointing. But I don't think we need committee members in every element of this. However, on the steering committee, we do want a committee member to be part of that steering group, just to be able to give us the input. There are likely going to be decisions along the way that become the purview of school committee, in which the whole school committee is involved in that process. The purpose of these groups is not necessarily that the committee members are reporting back to the full committee for the purpose of deliberation later. That's not the intent of this. It's to simply give some school committee members an opportunity to be at the table with us and understand our planning process and be able to contribute kind of that representative of the community voice as we go through the planning here. But we certainly recognize that there's could be elements of budget, there could be elements of contracts, which are school committee purview and policy that will come back to the full committee along the way here. So with that said, I'm happy to take any comments, questions, and I'm going to stop sharing so that we can see each other during this.
Okay, so I'll just remind everyone the way this works, that you get an opportunity to ask one question, and then after everyone else has had an opportunity, if you still have another question, I'd be happy to call on you. John, I see that your hand is up.
Yes, obviously this is a great framework for getting us ready to reopen. But it strikes me that this is not an insignificant commitment from lots of people in the district. And so the question is, since everybody was already pretty busy, what are you going to take off people's plates so that they can appropriately focus on this critical activity?
I wish there was a lot that we could take off people's plates. I'm going to be really honest. I think there's very little that can come off our administrators' plates right now. And I think that's on the forefront of their minds. The biggest thing we're trying to work on in all of this planning is how to give some of our administrators a vacation during the summer, because they really need to take a break. And, I think our whole admin team needs some time to kind of regroup and get our heads together again so that when we come back, we're really effective at what we do. I think one of the things we're thinking of is trying to see if we can team up with some other districts, in all honesty, so that the brainstorming process becomes a little bit broader, and we don't have to just operate in isolation. The final decisions we make have to be ours, but that doesn't mean we can't listen to other district ideas about what might work. I wish I had a better answer for you, John, but there's just not a lot that can come off plates right now.
A follow-up question to that, Peter, is what is the time commitment that you're thinking in terms of people that would volunteer from the school committee to serve on those two committees? What are you thinking in terms of that?
I don't think we're going to do long meetings. These are going to be shorter meetings, but very, very hyper-focused on topics. From a steering committee perspective, we're looking basically once a week between now and fall. We'll probably take a week off around the 4th of July, at least to get people out of town a little bit. And then from the working group perspective, we're really looking at 2 times a week. And a working group could choose to work a little bit more, but we're really thinking it's probably going to be 2 times a week.
Okay. Michael, did you have a question?
I have one comment and one question. Okay.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the comment is that regarding 100-day, the phases. The first 100-day, I think is okay because it's perfect because it's the summer, right? So, but the second 100-day, I want to just to bring your attention that because from my reading, so a lot of experts, medical experts, they're talking about the virus could come back, the second wave, from the fall to winter. So if we consider that 100-day, which is from September through the December, right? So it could be like change very rapidly. If the pandemic will come back, right? The second wave will come back. So so maybe that period you may want to add more incremental small phases, right? So to deal with that rapid change. So that's my comment. And my question is that so when we talk about finance, so definitely when we come back in the September, we're going to have do a lot of deep cleanings of the school. We may add more resources or more equipments to help the students to maintain their health. So so my question is that are we going to revise the? Are you going to revise the or adamant the budget? Or do you?
That's a great question. So we'll be talking about that later in the budget presentation. But what we're doing in our budget proposal is we're actually, we're making $1 million adjustment to the budget now, but half of that is being used to reduce the assessments to the communities. The other half is going to be held in reserve. So we basically have $500,000 reserved in our budget for COVID-related issues that we can use along the way. Additionally, what we're finding is between the CARES 1 Act and the CARES 3 Act, as well as some of the FEMA and NEMA disaster relief funds that are available, some of the work we will do around bringing students back and preparing for health needs as well as distance learning can actually be reimbursed. So right now we're thinking that $500,000 feels like about the right number to hold in reserve, and if we don't need it at all, we can return that to the following year's budget through E&D. But we did plan for kind of a contingency. So good question.
Angie? You're muted. Angie, you're muted.
Yeah. Hi, Peter. So thanks for the great framework. I'm just excited to see the word agile there. So the question is around kind of along with John's question, because I see this framework increase a lot of communication channels. So the question is, do you plan to have a single point of contact for each group, like a Scrum Master? Or are you going to plan to update the parents' communication map? Because I see the communication is going to be with this many group and people, and the channels is a lot.
Yeah, I think in terms of how we go about planning for communication, that actually will be something that the communication and stakeholder group does, is creating what our communication plan looks like. In terms of communicating to the different committees and getting stakeholder feedback on our plans, that will filter through this one committee on communication. So what I think the earliest job that we're thinking for our communication committee is to actually create a survey for our families, for our students, and for our educators around, what they're thinking about and what's on their minds coming back. I don't actually think that needs to be overly complicated. I think if you just ask people what worries you right now, you're going to get a wealth of information. But then that committee will be responsible for taking it in, coding it, and then splitting out the feedback to whatever the appropriate committee is that needs to hear that. And then I think what we'll probably do is try and send out several other smaller things and think of different communication vehicles that we can really think about how do we prepare our community for this idea of coming back, because I think that's going to be a large task. I don't necessarily think each of these groups would have a scrum master, traditional to, kind of an engineering process. It's kind of a modified agile process, I guess. But it is a scrum diagram, so I know where the question came from.
So are you gonna update the parent communication map?
We may, but that's to be determined.
Okay, thank you.
Adam?
Thanks, Peter. First thing that came to mind as I was reading through this material is, the saying about the duck, where on the surface everything looks calm and peaceful, but underneath you know that he's paddling super feverishly. So it's great to see some of the output from that. And mine is also a comment sort of about the plan as a whole. I would encourage as we move forward with this to find the what we would say in the software development world, the minimally viable product. What is the thing that we have to get done? Because as your presentation started, there's a big question mark ahead of us, and we just don't know what is going to end up as a roadblock along the way of this planning. And oftentimes I see a lot of people get very excited about their part of the plan and reluctant to let that go when the emergency comes up. So, when your entire administration team just up and walks out on you in the second week of August and says we need a break, it would be good to have a plan to sort of mitigate those unexpected bumps along the road.
Adam, thank you. I appreciate that comment. I may not use the term minimally viable product when I'm meeting with groups of families.
Interestingly, the acronym is MVP, so it's the most valuable product too.
Perfect.
Paul?
So I see that there's been a lot of thought into putting a plan together. I very much appreciate the sensitivity to the numbers of players in each game. One thing that I'm wondering is if there is that second wave, is that what you mean by the hybrid, is to be able to kind of shift back to distance learning for a period of time and then shift forward to, back to kind of the new normal?
Yeah, my current thinking is that we need to have a good distance learning plan, and we need to be able to plan to be on campus at times. We don't know what that's going to look like yet. I have a gut feeling that the state may tell us and tell the entire state that there's one model that people are going to start the year with until there's a better control in terms of public health. It's only a gut feeling. I don't have a basis for that, but I think the biggest challenge, if every district creates its own plan, it will leave every district in a bit of a lurch because our staff don't all live in Acton and Boxborough. And so no matter how beautiful of a schedule we could come up with that meets our needs, if it also doesn't somehow sync with all of the area communities where our staff and live and kids go to school and things like that, we're going to have a lot of problems. So I'm thinking and hoping that there's some level of state coordination, but I don't have any sense of what it's going to look like yet. I think as we talk with our leadership team, we have a lot of anxiety about planning for this. I think, obviously, given the nature of it. But what we've talked about is we need to identify the areas of this that we can control and make sure we're planning for those first. For example, we know what we need to think about from a teaching and learning standpoint. We don't know when students are going to be on campus and off campus yet. We just don't know that. So let's tackle the things we can control first and are the knowns, and then we leave time at the end to plan for more of the unknowns or don't know that we don't know it yet.
Jenny?
I really appreciate the presentation, Peter, and just awed by the challenge. What I wanted to ask was, is there any commitment from the state about when and if and what kind of guidance they're going to give? it seems like, and I'm experiencing this, you know, in the context of the municipal questions, that it's like 351 entities are making it up as we go along, with the state letting us know that they have concerns with any plan we come up with, but not giving, you know, guidance that we need, and making, you know, the rules that only they can make. So I think it's great that you're going to collaborate with other districts, but I really think a lot of this has to be work done at the state level, and I'm just wondering what your information is about the status of that.
The information I have is that I don't think it's likely we're going to get guidance from the state until late June, it's incredibly frustrating at the local level. But yet, I think if I was at the state level, I don't know how I would get it out the door much faster, because the information is changing for the state just as quickly as it is for us. So I have an equal level of empathy as frustration, if that makes sense. In terms of what's going to be mandated, I don't know. There's a piece of me that it would make it easier for everyone if they just told us how they want our schools to operate, and took the guesswork out of it. Otherwise, it's like a snow day on steroids, and that was a DMG phrase where, you know, like everyone recognizes that, you know, one superintendent may make a decision that's different from the 6 other districts around you. But boy, if you do, you have some explaining to do, right? And you better have some good reasoning. You know, I think on a personal level, it would be nice if we got a state framework for some of that. What I hope they don't do is take away local control over the teaching and learning process, because that's very individualized to the community. I have a feeling that's the way it's going to go, but we'll see how it plays out.
Angie, did you have a follow-up question?
I have a separate question.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Okay.
We meant a follow-up to what you already asked a question. That's what I meant by follow-up.
Okay. So this framework has our core value considered, which is equity, because when we promptly closed the school, that we couldn't do such an equity plan, but this plan that we have building our core values in already, right?
It does. And so what's interesting is we actually built in equity as a core tenet of our plans. And maybe I'll have Deb jump in too on this, but we were actually just recently cited by the state as an exemplar model of our learning plans, and specifically for the way in which we approached equity as a core tenet of planning. So Deb, you want to elaborate on that? Because it's absolutely awesome for all of our curriculum teams and worthy of recognition.
Thanks. And certainly I'll extend the invitation to Dawn too, if she wants to jump in as well. In the planning, for the distance learning planning teams, we initially made sure that we included special education representatives, educators, reading specialists, English language educators. We had building leadership. We have specialists on the teams. We have classroom teachers, as well as our curriculum coordinators, to make sure that right from the very beginning, all of those different perspectives were approached for any materials that were put on the learning board, as well as the lens of a UDL framework. So as they're being shared, there are always additional steps that parents can take in supporting their students, that teachers can take in supporting students with those activities. And so one of the great outcomes of this is that so many of our teachers are learning not only the UDL framework in a real practical sense after they took the course this past fall, but they're also learning how to do it with lots of different tools. And so the outcome has been that right from the very beginning, we're thinking through that way to make sure all of our activities are accessible for our students. So it's been a real shift in even how our teachers are thinking about teaching and learning, and then also supporting our students. Dawn, I don't know if you want to add anything. Okay.
Michael, did you have another question?
Oh yeah, just a quick question then for Peter. When the school reopen, so how you just in your mind, how do you want to implement the social distancing? But in the meantime, we can, because one major thing for the students, for our kids in the school, is that they can they can have the social in the school, so they can work together, even face to face or talking, play together. So how do you want to maintain the social distancing with the consideration of those things?
So I think there's, a number of ways that we're going to be thinking about that, but I think that's early in the process to talk about, any one way in particular. We know from some of the different countries that have opened up, there are different approaches. I think we'll certainly be looking at all of our factors, from schedules that students are on campus, how we transport students to school, what that looks like, thinking about, student desks in classrooms. Those are some of the things that we are seeing as possible best practices. I think that's something we want to think through more before I commit to any one measure of how we're going to do it. And I think we're going to need guidance from the state. And, I think the other unknown factor, in all honesty, is, I think our world has changed about 15 times over since March. And I would expect it will probably change 10 more times, at least between now and when we come back. So I think there's a plan, and then there's the planning process that we're focused on right now.
At the moment, I don't see any hands up. So the process that Peter and I agreed to is that you, as committee members, would send me your interest in participating on either one of those two committees that Peter mentioned. And it goes without saying that if you're stepping off the committee, then this isn't something that you're going to want to participate in, because the work, as I understand it from Peter, is going to begin soon and then continue throughout the summer. So I guess it also goes without saying that if there's a chance that you may not be on the committee after the election, that this might not be an opportunity for you either, because this is going to be a longer term commitment that will run through current and then future. Right, Peter?
Yeah, I think that's fair. Because I do think, and I know that makes it a challenge for some people, which I feel badly about. But I think one thing we want to do is, have continuity with this planning process too, because it's such a short time span. But I promise to keep talking to you.
I did have a question from someone who is joining from Acton. This work is going to start relatively soon, and they won't be sworn in until July. Does that make it impossible for them to participate on one of these two committees?
I would just defer to you, in all honesty, on that. We know they will be on the committee, but that's probably more of a committee level decision, but maybe we can talk about it when we meet.
Okay, that's fine. I just wasn't sure. I mean, it doesn't seem that that's something that they would have to be sworn in for, because it's not that this isn't a subcommittee of the school committee. It's
correct.
So right. That does make it a little bit different. Okay, well, that's good to know. So if those of you that have interest in serving, please be specific about whether it's the steering committee or the community outreach was the other one, right, Peter?
Yes.
Along with that.
Stakeholders and community communication.
Stakeholders and community engagement. So let me know which one, and I will pass that along, and I guess I guess Peter would contact whoever is chosen. I don't know, because you want to start work before our next meeting, is that right?
Yeah, I think we're likely to do a kickoff meeting next week to just make sure everyone's on the same page about the goals that each of the different committees have, tasks that are before each group, and kind of a launch plan. But as I said, this is evolving quickly, but that's the kind of thinking is at least, if not next week, very, very early the following week.
Okay, So with that said, get your interest to me soon. I will pass the name or names on to Peter, and there'll be a process of deciding. And I guess Peter will probably reach out to you if to let you know that he'd like you to participate in this meeting. Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay. So up next we have the K-8 Mathematics 2021 presentation from Deb and David and Heather, right?
Yeah. Yes, and so I can share. Yeah, okay. I want to make sure I can do that. Get this to work. Okay. See. Hang on 1 second. Is there a way to do this so that we can also see? Unfortunately, I'm only on my one laptop, and so I won't be able to see notes. Is this okay? Can you see it? Let's see.
Yes.
Yes.
If I do it, let's see. Hang on 1 second.
You can,
Much
do you want to
prefer
send
to
that
do
to
it.
me and I can?
Deb, do you want me to share? And then, because
If you could,
I,
yeah.
in the vein of Sharon Ryan, have my printout here.
Oh, do you? Okay. All right. It takes over your whole screen and you can't see the whole thing. So if you can do it, that would be great.
You all can see how blind I am by how zoomed in I was there.
All right. Well, as Heather's putting that up to our first slide. So Heather Haynes is with us. She's our K-8 mathematics curriculum coordinator. And David Lawrence is with us also this evening. He's an assistant principal at R.J. Gray Junior High School. So we wanted to share with you our thinking for next year, our plans for the 2020-21 school year, and about how we're going to be thinking about one program going forward. So our main goal is to make sure that we're laying a foundation of materials for every classroom teachers. And this is so that our teachers can really focus on making those materials work for the students that they know best, that they have what they need and can really focus on that match with students and making sure that they're meeting the needs of students as opposed to spending time looking for materials, searching for routines, etc. So that is our main goal. So why one program? All of our students should have access to a high quality mathematics experience with the structures and supports that are needed to build grade level understandings. And by this, we mean a real equitable learning experience in the sense that students should always be experiencing grade level content. We know that students, the gap widens year to year if students are not exposed to grade level content. And so that's a really important mainstay going forward. Another reason why one program is we've just experienced in the event that we ever have to move to distance learning, one program really allows continuity in the program and in learning in an online environment. Implementing high quality, universally designed, culturally sustaining, behaviorally supported and evidence-based tier 1 materials is really part of an MTSS framework, or as we're going to be calling it, a system of aligned supports. That statement is taken from the Department of Ed. It is the statement that they are making around all materials going forward. And just to share a little bit with you, behaviorally supported has to do with positive behavioral interventions and supports. And what this means, it's really about the structures and the routines of a program that support student positive engagement with the materials, thus leading to more kinds of pro-social behavior, as well as culturally sustaining materials. And so being culturally responsive really refers to the practices that actively draw upon students, their diverse backgrounds, their identities, their strengths, and challenges as a strategy to really deepen the learning. So those two pieces are really already built into the program that we're going to be sharing with you, and we think is really important going forward. In an MTSS or SAS framework, we're calling it the SAS framework. Our educators need clear and consistent guidelines and tools for when students might need more time or intensive instruction. And so right now, we don't have that with lots of different programs. And so one program would allow for us to have those consistent guidelines going forward in a framework. It also provides clear and consistent roles and responsibilities for all the educators in the building around the teaching of mathematics. Okay, to the next slide. Continuing why one program. One mathematics program also enables all of our professional learning, which includes our student-centered coaching, to be more coherent and accessible for all of our educators. Right now, our coaches are needing to learn a few programs. This will help clarify, it will help make that more coherent for our educators. One program also allows for movement between buildings for students and educators. So we have special educators, STEAM coaches, English language educators who work in more than one program. So this fluidity, this will allow them easier transfer from one school to another, as well as for students without having to know more than one program. It also then increases the sharing and the coordination of the materials and resources across the district. And then lastly, all of our updates, resources, information can be located in one place so that all of our educators can have access to those materials and resources. Again, like our special educators, our English language educators, our coaches, and our building leaders. So as we're building out materials, all of that will be available for everyone. So the one program is Illustrative Math, further known as IM. We can use the acronym going forward. So we wanted to share with you what sort of factored into our thinking of using IM for grades K through 8. First of all, it's aligned with our core values of wellness, equity, engagement. You're going to hear more about the equity engagement in the next several slides, but I want to talk about the wellness piece. By intentionally working for strong, positive math dispositions for all students. You're going to see, again, the other values reflected in some of the other structures. But the real hope is that through learning mathematics, that students identify themselves as mathematicians and have a healthy mindset around learning mathematics. You might have seen some things in the news recently about all the stats, the statistics that are out there, just even around COVID, and how people are taking in that information, the kinds of questions that are being asked. And there have been some interesting articles recently about math anxiety that's pretty prevalent across our country and how people interact with that kind of information. So these math dispositions we think is really important going forward. Many of the routines and practices that are already built into IM are inclusive, and they engage students in developing skills in social emotional learning. And again, it's really strongly connected to CASEL's 5 core competencies in SEL. For example, there are opportunities for student reflection, which includes how they think about themselves as mathematicians to grow that positive math mindset. And so that has to do with self-awareness, thinking about themselves. It also involves planning their next steps for how they're going to grow as a mathematician. Additionally, group work is embedded throughout the program, which really helps build social awareness and interactive social skills. UDL practices are also built into the structure of the program and the lessons. There are multiple opportunities for multiple means of engagement, for representation, and for expression, which are the 3 areas for UDL. And then over the past 20 years, the district has had experience and has gained a lot of information about many other mathematics programs that have been implemented here at AB. So we already have all that knowledge base built in to our system about all the other programs that could be available for us. And then lastly, it contains the components of what would be termed high quality mathematics program. And these are depicted on the next slide as part of Ed Reports and the curate criteria for evaluating mathematical programs. So you can see on the left, this is Ed Reports report on illustrative math and curate. And this is for grades 6-8 because it's been around for a few years. K-5 is in the beta version, which is what Heather will be talking about in a minute. But you can see for the different areas how highly rated it is. It is one of the highest rating mathematics program through both of these different resources. And then the very last reason is that it's free. It's an open source material, except for the consumables and for some optional online resources. It's free and will remain free. So I'm going to turn this over now to Heather, and she's going to speak a little bit more about these components of the high quality math program and also the structure of the IM program.
So some of the components that we think about here at AB that were also factored into ed reports and curates rating are whether or not materials are aligned to the content standards and whether understandings develop in a meaningful way, and whether the problems in the program allow students to engage in the standards for math practice. And IM does both of these things. And there are quite a few other programs that do those top two things as well. The place that IM really shines is in these next two areas, which Curate has started to include in their ratings, which is how accessible is it for all students, and how usable is it for teachers. So as Deb mentioned, there are UDL components in all of the lessons and supports for all learners to make sure that all of our students are leaving AB with a positive math disposition and an understanding of mathematics. When we think about usability for teachers, the way that Curate looks at that is to look at what NCTM, the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics, calls the effective teaching practices. So how well do the materials support those effective teaching practices? There are 8 of them. I only put 5 on the screen, and for time's sake, I'm only going to go through a few. IM does support all of the teaching practices, but you probably don't want to hear about that. And if you do, you can let me know. So one of the effective teaching practices is that we need to establish mathematical goals as teachers for our lessons and for our units. And for each lesson, IM has teacher-facing goals as well as student-facing goals so that everybody knows what do we hope to get to at the end of this lesson. Another one of the effective teaching practices is facilitating discourse, because we know that we all learn when we're talking to other people about our ideas. And one of the standards for math practice is that students should be able to construct viable arguments and critique the reasoning of others. IM has math routines and language routines embedded in it to help teachers to support students in that discourse. And we also want to use evidence of student thinking. We need to know, did students take away from this lesson what we wanted them to? And are they coming into this learning with the understanding that we need them to have? And IM has formative assessment built into units and lessons. So before each unit, there is a formative assessment of prerequisite skills. So we can see, is there unfinished learning that students are coming in with? Or are they on solid footing and are we good to move forward in this unit? And then for each lesson, did kids take away from this what we hoped they did so that we know what we need to plan for tomorrow? So I'm going to give you a little taste of the structure of IM, and I would love quick participation from brave members here. This routine is called Which One Doesn't Belong? And it's a routine that's embedded in the K-8 IM. And in the routine, there are 4 items. In this case, we have 4 equations. And the question to you is, which one doesn't belong? I'll give you a hint. You could give me any of them that don't belong, and you would be right. The important thing here is for you to justify your thinking. So I'll give you, say, 10 seconds of quiet think time. And then I'll ask somebody else who can see everyone to tell me who a brave volunteer is.
I can't see everyone, so I'm going to have to give that to somebody that can't, because with the screen shared, I don't have that ability.
All right, let me see if I can pop you all out. And if you are willing to share, you could visually raise your hand. John, which one do you think doesn't belong and why?
The one in the upper right, the 4 plus 3x.
And why do you think?
So if you look at the other expressions, you can find, 4x in the upper left simply by distributing 4 across x plus 3. You can see 4x just with a little bit different notation at the bottom left, and you can see 4x again at the bottom right.
Thank you, John. Is there someone else who'd be willing to justify another one of the items? Paul, was that the one you were going to pick too? Yes. All right, I can't see all the people all the way on the right, so I apologize if you've got your hand raised. For time's sake, if this were my classroom, I would wait you all out, but for time's sake, I won't. So in this routine, we're giving kids an invitation to the learning. And as you can see, all of these are possible for why which one doesn't belong. Whoop. Okay. So I had the opportunity to attend a webinar when IM announced they were looking for schools to partner with to look at the beta version of their K-5 curriculum. And as I was watching the webinar, I was thinking about how well it matched with our wellness, equity, and engagement beliefs here as a district. And in the graphic, you can see what the 5 core principles are that IM has, and that belief that all students can learn math, all students can make sense of mathematics, and that all of us have unique perspectives that are an important part of a math classroom. Students need to be given the opportunity to play with math before they're learning the structures and algorithms, and that students are going to develop mathematical understanding alongside their use of language. So this is a graphic of how IM is structured, and you all had the opportunity to experience one of the warm-up routines. And IM has these routines built in every day to every lesson to invite students into the learning. The routine that you all saw was a 7th grade routine before students are going to look at the connection between equations, visual models, and situations. So it makes sense for kids to be looking at the components of equations before they're going to do that more formally in class. And so that more formal way is with activities where students are working in small groups, and teachers are going around and monitoring what students are doing and thinking about how can I use that student understanding to be able to make sure that all students took away from this activity what I want them to. And then at the end of a lesson, how can I use the work that students did today to think about how I can make sure all students took away from the lesson what I wanted them to. In K1, sometimes students are doing what IM is calling a cool down, which is that formative assessment. 1 or 2 questions, at most 5 minutes. Did kids take away that big idea? And then sometimes students are working on centers, which are helping to build on the lesson of the day and also build on fluency standards for the grade level. As you can see, 2 to 5 looks very similar, except students are doing that cool down every day in grades 2 to 5. And the centers are sort of outside additional opportunities for students to spend time in math. And then 6 to 8, you can see again, looks very similar, except that there aren't any centers in the 6 to 8 structure. So I'm going to quickly take you through the timeline of how we got to where we are today. So for K5, after I had the opportunity to attend the webinar, I presented to the elementary principals and then to the schools to see who would be interested. And in January, teachers indicated whether or not they were interested in trying out this K-5 curriculum. In February, we were accepted to be part of IM's K-5 beta. 6th grade is a slightly different time frame. We started investigating IM back in 2017 for 6th grade when the 6 to 8 came out. it rose to the top of programs we were looking at that time. And we've had the opportunity to try that program with really positive feedback from teachers over the past few years. We also had the opportunity to visit other teachers who are using it in surrounding districts. Newton, Brookline, Franklin all invited us to come there, and we heard really positive things from those teachers as well. In 7-8, starting in 2013 through last school year, the teachers have been thinking about what are those effective teaching practices and what do those look like in the classroom. And in 2019, 2020, we really started to dig into what does a high quality math program look like and which of those programs are going to have the structures in place to help us to use those effective teaching practices. And as part of that work, we started to look at IM. So just a little bit about what the implementation will look like. In July and August, teachers who are interested in trying out the K-5 will engage in virtual professional learning. And then during the school year, there will be continued virtual professional learning by IM, as well as support for teachers through the coaches and the coordinators. And at the end of the year, we'll look at feedback from teachers and make a decision about whether this is a program that we would like to continue and move forward as a district. The professional learning we'll look at what the structure of the program is. So what I just gave you that brief glance at, sort of dig deeper into that and how do you implement that as a classroom teacher. Thinking about connections and models that go across the grades and those instructional routines, like which one doesn't belong and other routines. Teachers will dig into that and give those a try. And have the opportunity to look at that first unit of the grade. And then we'll continue with webinars during the school year, as well as face-to-face time facilitated by our coaches and me. For grade 6, the teachers who are new to IM will engage in PL with the 7th and 8th grade teachers before instruction starts. And then they'll have the opportunity to work with their grade level colleagues and get support from the STEM coaches. David, would you like to take over here?
Yeah, it's not going to look very different in the junior high, frankly, from the K-5, because we're kind of in the same position. We're going to spend the equivalent of 2 days of PL in the summer. Probably if it's distance learning, it's probably going to be broken up into into maybe 5 shorter sessions rather than 2 really long sessions, just because of how distance learning feels a little bit different, I think, when you're looking at a Zoom screen for 7 hours at a time. So I think we'll probably do smaller sessions, but more of them in the summer. And then very similar to the K-5, also have a series of shorter professional learning, probably webinars throughout the year as well.
So with that, we're happy to take any of your questions about professional learning or IM itself.
I'll start by saying I'm thrilled about this because my 6th grader currently does illustrative, and I think it's a fantastic program. And after being through, like, I don't know how many math programs in elementary school, I am absolutely beyond thrilled to hear that this is what she'll be doing in the junior high, because it will be the first year in many that she will have a continuous experience of doing the same program. And I really do think that this is a great program. So thank you for the really thorough presentation. Maya?
Yeah, I feel I have to acknowledge how exciting this is. I love the alignment among schools. I think it's going to be great for teachers and students. And it's the kind of math program I think I wish I had grown up with. So it seems really exciting. I do wonder who funds it. I think you said, Heather, that or Deb, that there's no cost to us. And is there a lot of professional learning that comes with the product? And or is that just something that we carry out in-house from now on? I may have just missed that.
I can take that one, or you can, Deb.
Go ahead, Heather. You know.
So when there's an organization, a nonprofit called Open Up Resources, and their goal was to create open educational resources for all of the disciplines so that schools would know that there were high quality materials, but mostly so that schools had money to spend on professional learning, because their belief was that's really where the money should be going. So Open Up Resources put out a call for who would like to write this curriculum, and Illustrative Math, which is another nonprofit organization, won the right to write the curriculum. And so that's where, that's why it's a open educational resource, and it will always be free because of the license that it was written under.
Adam?
Thanks, everybody, for the presentation. I'm also really excited to have the single sort of unified content across, not just from 6th into the middle school, but then also across all the schools. I think that provides a lot of opportunities for our students. My question, however, is, you know, each of our elementary schools sort of has their own culture. And is there a way within this curriculum to still have those schools be able to deliver or customize the program while keeping to the spirit of their individual cultures?
I think we learned a lot this past year, and Heather, again, from 6th grade, I think you can probably speak a little bit more to this, that all of our schools, I think one teacher at one school is not using it this year, but even within the differences between our schools, this was a program that really lent itself to still be able to either collaborate with projects, if that was the approach, or to be single, like the single math teacher in the school, or to then to be able to work where each teacher was just a contained classroom. And so I do think it lent itself to all those different variations. But Heather, I know you worked with the 6th grade teachers, and if you have any other examples you want to share.
I think that the fact that you've got this core program, which has really high quality stuff, means that as a teacher, you can think about, how do I want to implement this for my students? So obviously, you can't write a curriculum that knows every student that's in front of you, right? So the job of the teacher is to think about, how do I make this work for the kids who are in front of me? And so I am giving you all of these things to help you to support your students. But as a teacher, you're making those educational decisions about, you know, how do I use this to best support the kids in front of me?
Which was one of our main goals in choosing materials, is to make sure the teachers then had their time, that their bandwidth was spent matching the experiences for their students. One of the things we noticed as we went through the beta pilot materials is that it really does incorporate a lot of the wonderful same routines that some of the other programs have. So they sort of took from other programs, sort of the best of the best also, and put those things together. So not all of it's new for our teachers. They'll see some things that are very familiar as well. So.
Great, thank you.
Paul?
So one thing, and I think I just got the answer to my question, but one thing that I did like about having schools have the ability to choose their own programs and having a diversity of programs was the ability to have engagement with students that have different learning styles. But what I just heard was that there's some flexibility built in, so that although it is the same program for all schools, there's the flexibility to address different
different learning styles. That's all I really need to hear.
Angie?
I'll jump in on that too, Paul, for a second. I think that's a great point, and certainly one that, you know, I've been thinking about a lot. And, you know, I think by that notion, though, the only thing I might offer is that, you know, if every individual school chose its own math program because the kids were strikingly different, then you would make the same argument that each teacher picks a different program because the kids might be different. And then you probably have to make the argument as well that every student should receive their own program because they're all different too. And so at some point you have to have an organizational structure. And so I think there is a trade-off with this, and it's the ability to make sure we can adequately support all of our students across all of our schools and have resources that we can make sure are equitable across the district to meet the needs of all of our kids. So, you know, there's a give and take, but I don't think that, you know, Blanchard students don't think mathematically in remarkably different ways than Conant students do, or McCarthy Town students do. At least as a group, I think, you know, we all know the dangers of aggregating data. Right, John?
Oh yeah, I'm ready to go there.
I'm not following you yet, John. Hold your horses. Paul, I also think it's really interesting every time we bring up this thing about the elementary schools. We don't question the fact that, like, the junior high uses a math program that's different from what all of the elementary schools use, and those kids came from all of the elementary schools, and yet the math program that they use at the junior high works for everybody. So, you know, I think at some point math is math, and kids are kids, and teachers are teachers. But just my opinion. Angie? Oh, sorry. Yeah, Angie.
Yeah. It's kind of follow up on Peter's question, which is, yeah, thanks for the presentation. And this is brand new to me because I don't have a younger kids. And when I was looking at the example that you present, it shows to me this method is kind of focused and has large abstract thinking included in the math, which and this is where I'm coming from, which is abstract thinking is the younger kids doesn't have that kind of capability yet, and some of the kids are weaker in that area. So I'm actually curious about, you mentioned about a trial, and what we have learned from the trial in terms of different learning style of kids, how they respond to the program. Because my concern is for some kids that are more logical, more left brain, okay, and it will be hard for them to pick up some abstract thinking. So how we be able to support different style of kids?
So go ahead. Well, and Heather, feel free to jump in. What Heather shared with you was just one example of an invitational routine. It's not the entire structure of the entire program. So there involves abstract and some practical application and practice, variation of different kinds of learning experiences for students built in within the program. As a former first and second grade teacher, which one doesn't belong can be done with just shapes. It can be done with just pictures. And it's really, truly wonderful to see students engage in that type of thinking, even early childhood, as young as nursery school and kindergarten students. So you're building that abstract thinking all along the way, as well as the practical application, as well as the practice throughout. I don't know if you want to add to.
And I think that we want all students to develop the areas that maybe aren't easy for them. So if, you know, I love math, but that doesn't mean that I shouldn't learn other areas as well. And that, you know, I was glad that my teachers pushed me to think about those other areas, and they may not end up being things that I love as much or that are things that are as easy for me yet. But I think that we all need to have experiences in all sorts of different areas so that we can grow as learners.
Thank you.
All right. Michael and John still have questions. I just want to remind everybody, though, that this is a presentation and we're not actually like voting or choosing or helping to decide. This is what's being done, and so it's merely being presented to us. Questions are good. I want people to understand what's happening in our school district, but just so you understand, that's the purpose of the presentation. Michael, did you have a quick question?
First of all, I want to piggyback to what Adam and Paul said about customization, about how to fit. Because to me, that one, it looks to me that it's a one-fits-all program. When we talk about the student centering, when we emphasize that, so I don't know how the one-fits-all will help this situation, help this to be in line with the student centering. But that's not my question. My question is about that example you gave. It's because I think I need more to learn more about this. I need more examples to learn more about this. But the example you gave me a strong sense that we are teaching the mathematics toward standard test. I mean, like, if you take the SAT, GRE, those standard tests, you will see that the question will be, okay, so please, for ABCD, please pick 3 you think it's true, right? Or pick 1 you think is false. So that example shows the exact same. Just give me this a strong sense. So my question is that is that what we're going to do in this IM new program to just train the students to be more toward the standard, to adapt the standard test?
Yeah, actually, quite the opposite. It's really to have students think deeply about mathematics and to be able to, Heather was sharing earlier, to be able to justify their thinking and their reasoning. So the example she gave was not that there was one right answer, that would be on an SAT test, but in fact, there were 4 right answers that you had to justify why your answer was the correct one. So it's actually the complete opposite. It is in line, though, with the mathematical practices and the standards by grades and the big ideas that are outlined by the National Council of Mathematics and Teachers.
Yeah, I'll be more appreciative if you could send more examples.
Michael, I'm going to stop you because that's not the purview.
Oh, I know. Yeah, I'm just yeah.
If you're interested, you can reach out to Heather, but that's not the purview of the school committee. The leaders get to make the decisions, and they're informing us and letting us know why they chose a particular program. Okay, John.
So I wanted to follow up on the discussion around different students, and one approach being different programs and another approach being a common program that has flexibility to reach out to individual students. And, as I listened to that part of the discussion, I think it's very compelling to have, a common tool that then we modify to reach each individual student. And so this is probably not really a question for tonight, but what I'd like to understand is how you take a common tool like this and adjust it for students who have different paces and different learning styles. Because I think everybody's agreed the students are different. We can pick any classroom and we're going to find different kids. So how we are in the district enabling our teachers to be able to use those programs, reflecting the fact that they have students sort of all over the map pace wise and coming at the material from different directions. That would be great. Thanks.
So I think I want to address learning styles for just a moment. I think it's really, really important. There's been a lot of wonderful literature out in the last several years about learning style and how we need to really be careful when we're talking about it. To say someone has a learning style, we need to be thinking more around what are students' strengths in an area, and then thinking how do we build on those strengths to areas where they're more challenged and that we can support them in learning in different ways. And so all of us have particular ways we're more comfortable doing things. But there's a bit of a misnomer out there around having a style and one way of doing something, and then only being taught in that way, so that we're not stretching, we're not learning other ways of going about something. So it's really, the focus has now become on what is a student's strength, and thinking of that as being the starting point, and then building off of that. The other thing I wanted to just point out really quickly is that as we're building a system of aligned services, which is our term for MTSS, we really do need to be thinking about how we can build the system. And one of the ways that we can do that is to have some consistencies across the district, so we can also have identified and clear guidelines around when students might need more intensive time and support. And so that's why it's another rationale for this, that they need to go hand in hand. I don't know if that answered all of your question, John. I know it might have started, so there's still a piece left. Certainly let me know.
All right. Thank you, Deb. I appreciate it. Thank you. Oh, Amy, do you have a question? Sorry.
Sorry, I don't have a question. I just wanted to say I'm so thrilled that this is happening, that we're getting consistency across the district, and everything I've read about learning and mathematics learning, this fits exactly what we are learning about the brain. So thank you so much for everyone doing this.
And I was just going to echo that. Say thank you for such a thorough presentation. That was really informative, and I think it gives everybody a good perspective on what might be going on. Peter, did you want to say something? I know that there's a question in the queue.
I just wanted to recognize the question in the audience. Do you want me to just read it?
Yeah, go ahead.
So this is from Shirley, and it's just a question. How does IM compare and contrast with what the traditional math curriculum might look like? The presentation seemed focused on the IM format. It wasn't necessarily clear how it's better.
So I think that goes back to, go ahead.
I can start and you can.
Yeah, go ahead, that's fine.
So the structure of the IM program is that students are working on problems, and the teacher is the facilitator, and making sure that students really are taking away from a lesson what the big idea is. We all know that sometimes you can think that you've explained something, and you think that, say, your children, for example, understand what the big idea is of something, and then when you check in, they don't. And so really, the teacher here is making sure that there's a synthesis of learning, that kids are really taking away from it what we were hoping for, and making sure that they're facilitating conversation between and among students.
Thank you, everyone. That was a great presentation, and thank you for answering and being patient with everyone's questions. All right, committee, we're officially like 45 minutes behind already, so we still have Peter's evaluation report, final goals report to go. So everyone can just focus. We stand up and stretch, go right ahead. But my goal is to get out of here before 10 o'clock. So.
And if you are done presenting, you're welcome to take off. You don't have to feel like you have to remain a panelist. Right. Am I starting up, Tessa?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sorry. Okay. So we have a presentation on Peter's. Sorry. We have a presentation on Peter's, the final report on Peter's goals tonight. In your packet, you saw that there is the timeline slide that I had in my previous presentation around his evaluation. And I'll get to that after he presents his goals. In your packet, you have the work that was done up until March, and then he added some additional notes on what's been done thus far. But Peter's done a great job of providing us with the evidence that we need in order to fill out the evaluation, which you all should have received for Beth as well, I think. So go right ahead, Peter.
So this is not a separate presentation necessarily. Instead, I'll just provide a little bit of context to some of what you're looking at, and an opportunity for you to ask some questions. if you have them. So, one thing I do want to highlight, I think as a leadership team and as a district would have hoped that we were further along on some of these, but, largely most of the work toward these goals stopped when we closed, because simply the resources of our leadership and faculty and, all of our curriculum coordinators who were working towards some of these goals had to be diverted to dealing with the more immediate needs of the closure. So, what was interesting in looking back at the timeline, I gave you my mid-year update exactly 7 days before we closed. So that's the reason that there's not a lot of new information. But what I did want to do was allow you to kind of track what was mid-year versus what had happened since. So I kind of color-coded that a little bit differently for you to read. Originally it was in red, but then I think Dawn gave me feedback saying, wait a minute, red means bad universally, so be careful. So you'll see the end of the year updates in green. What I wanted to do, I'll invite, either Deb or Dawn, if you want to highlight just a couple of the pieces of the evidence toward the literacy goal. I don't want to go through everything, but just to provide a little bit of context to that. As you know, we were working on a unified literacy vision for the district over the course of the year. And maybe Deb, do you want to start? But Dawn, feel free to jump in as well.
Sure. So the first bullet there just lists out some of the workshops that were presented to our educators throughout the fall and the winter, really to build capacity, to build people's understanding around some of the changes around the dyslexia legislation, but also really what makes for best practices in teaching reading. And so you can see there were three. One was done around evidence-based resources, so what makes something evidence-based. So people have an understanding as we're looking for materials, why we're looking for evidence-based materials and practices. And then the cognitive challenges of learning to read, and then really supporting dyslexia in terms of evaluation and eligibility. We also had outside people come and present. So Joanna Christodoulou, as you know, came and presented to our educators around the science of reading, which was really fantastic. And then our own literacy coordinator presented in our Thursday sessions around the early markers of dyslexia. So our educators could dig in even a little bit deeper, and they did that through 3 different Thursday sessions. We were part, as you know, of the early literacy screening tool that was being developed by Boston Children's Hospital, and that is now called the Early Bird Screener. So we were able to provide them some feedback as they went ahead and launched it. So that just, there's some evidence there that shows you that we were invited into being part of that. The subcommittee work, which unfortunately came to a halt in March, there were 4 subcommittees. 2 of the subcommittee, I shared with you some of the work that's been done so far. That is a draft vision statement, and then really defining the roles and responsibilities, as well as the professional learning and training that would be needed for all of the people in the school building who could be responsible for helping teach reading. And so again, that's in draft form. It has not yet been vetted out. It hasn't even been shared yet with our educators, but it's a beginning to really define what are those roles and responsibilities. And we had 2 other subcommittees working as well, one around the screening tools and assessments, and then one on evidence-based instructional practices and resources. So all 4 subcommittees were working right up until March. We put together a group of district leaders who attended DESI's MTSS conference in February, so we can learn a little bit more from the state level and to hear what other districts were doing around building out an MTSS framework. So there's some evidence, actually all of the resources that they shared with us, you now have access to through that link. One of our literacy coordinators was invited into the Massachusetts Literacy Champion committee work. They did a lot of work around what makes for good early literacy instruction, and their work will be public and posted in October. So we had someone represent our district, but was also able to bring back that information early on for our own work. And then going forward, and John can speak on this as well, John and I began to build out what will be our system of aligned services, which is going to be our internal MTSS framework. John, do you want to share any more on that, the framework, or you think we're already done?
Sure.
There you go. Okay.
So over a number of years, we've really been thinking a lot about this and thinking a lot about our work around our strength-based approaches and how do we get away from a model that continues to be what many people call a broken child model, which is, oh, this child isn't doing something that we expect him or her to be able to do for this age or this grade level. And so therefore, this child has to go and be fixed somewhere else by somebody else. And so really moving away from this notion that our general education teachers don't have the skills necessary to be able to support students who don't necessarily meet expectations in the timeframes that we expect them to, is something that Deb and I have really worked a lot around and thought a lot around. We really do believe, and we've been working to build out a coaching model over the last few years. And we really do believe that that is absolutely pivotal to be able to shift practice. When we think about professional learning and the amount that our educators are able to actually take and put into practice with all of the other demands on them when they go and they sit through 6 hours of a professional learning opportunity versus what happens when coaches are in a classroom. And so the system of aligned supports that, again, this is a draft and not vetted by anybody or anything. This is just sort of our initial thinking to bring together a lot of the work that's been happening over the last few years, is to really look across at all of the resources in our system and how do we align them to think about what are people really good at. You heard Dr. Levinson speak about this a few weeks ago at our DMG presentation, as well about our social and emotional learning behaviors and behavioral supports, and the fact that we want to be able to put people in positions where they have unique skill sets, because not every single educator comes out of school or related service provider with the same exact set of skills and the same exact set of strengths. So just like our kids. So that was really our thinking behind this model. And a lot of it is based around instructional consultation teams and the work of Todd Brevois under the aligned service delivery model. And there's a hyperlink there to a longer piece that sort of is, I don't know, it's kind of my educational mantra in general around unifying systems. So really we wanted to look at how do we integrate to the extent possible? How do we make it so that our general education teachers can spend the amount of time with kids? How can we make our system work so that our general educators are the ones setting the goals for the students because they know them the best and aren't necessarily always relying on other people to tell them what to do and how to do it. And all of this also ties into the MTSS review that we had done during 2016 and 2017 with Drs. Kukic and Batch, who did a supports review for the district. So we really tried to also look back at those recommendations and think about how do we want to really shore up our system here to make sure that our students get absolutely everything that they need and they deserve. The other thing we wanted to stay away from is this notion of tiers and tiered system of supports. I've been in a number of districts, and what ultimately ends up happening is instead of people labeling students as students who are in special education, they use language like, oh, he's a tier 1 kid or she's a tier 2 kid, or and language like that. And so we really wanted to stay away from anything else that labels kids unnecessarily. We know from Hattie's research that labels are not using labels are actually one of the strongest practices that we can employ in our system. So all of those things sort of came together in the last couple of years as Deb and I put together this super, super rough draft of our initial thoughts.
So in terms of stakeholder engagement was another one of our goals this year. And, you can obviously, read the narrative. We wanted to just provide you a few selected pieces of evidence for this. And I tried not to put so much evidence in that you felt like you were just swimming and trying to look at it, but just highlight a few examples of the work. So I put a link to the year-end report from last year that we did as a way of outreaching beyond just our school population and trying to get to every community member. We also had published the district newsletter. That's one that I wish we had gotten at least one more edition in, but the year didn't cooperate the way we hoped it would. We also included a little bit of evidence of the work that Dawn and I had tried to start with families and student DEI advisory groups. That's something that, we're hoping to think about how we can get that going again at the beginning of next year, because it was disappointing. I think we needed, a couple more meetings of those to really feel like the groups would gel and be able to move forward. And then just wanted to provide you a few examples, even though it wasn't in necessarily the original goals, but some different ways that we tried to continue to engage our stakeholders during the closure. There were also some examples of, some different kind of evening events that we did for people to actually come and have more two-way communication, but I didn't necessarily have links to those recordings, but I think you've been around during the closure and seen what we've tried to do in terms of engagement. Completing the district strategy is probably the area that I'm most frustrated that we couldn't get to this year because of our closure. What I did do, and I think I had sent this to you a while ago, but I did provide you a link to where we were in October, where we landed in terms of our final belief statement from our leadership team that we want to drive our thinking around improvement. And then we also had done a little bit of a draft strategy. We had gotten to that stage where we had our objectives defined, some of our strategic initiatives we also had defined. And if you recall, we had actually scheduled a school committee meeting and a workshop for, I think it was like 3 days after we closed. And unfortunately that got canceled. And some of this work, I don't really know if it lends itself all that well to Zoom. And so we decided that we would wait a little bit and do that upon our return. What we did do, however, in the interim, one of our goals that we had, we wanted to really make sure that we had an equity lens on everything that we were doing in this strategy. And so we reached out to the Mid-Atlantic Equity Consortium, and we had a series of conversations with them where they were able to provide us some feedback for consideration. I included that feedback so that you could actually see what they did from our original to kind of their markup of it. If we had our workshop, and when we do have our workshop, once we're all back together and I think the new committee is seated, we'll actually take a look at the original version of the strategy we did, the draft, plus the feedback from MEC, and then think about committee input to be able to finalize those goals. So that's really the next step. It's not complete work, but it certainly is evidence of kind of where we got to over the course of this year. And then in terms of social emotional supports, again, this is one that, to some degree was impacted by the closure, but a lot of this work was actually conducting the program eval, and you saw the results of that. And I think what I want to recognize is the amount of time and energy Dawn put in to actually get that executed, because that required a lot of coordination of stakeholder groups, multiple meetings with DMG to be able to talk about, the district's goals, history of the district, having an opportunity to have DMG observe classes, hear from stakeholders. We're also continuing our work with them, and it's not in here because it doesn't really lend itself well to evidence, but we're actually continuing that work now to think about engaging them and helping us align the work of all our social emotional educators, because I'm lacking a better word at this time of night. I apologize for that. But we want to make sure that when we come back from closure, that the roles that everyone plays are really well aligned in order to reduce some of the burden that our staff have. One thing that DMG heard loud and clear talking to our staff is there's a lot of overlap of roles and responsibilities and some confusion among our educators around who does what, and it's costing them time and energy. And so we want to make sure that as we come back, that can be a priority so that we're really efficient in how we support our students as they return from this closure. So we'll be working on that as well. Donna, I don't know if you have anything else you want to add to that, but that was really just the first step. And again, you heard the presentation almost immediately before, or actually it was during our closure, not even before. So that was the work there. And then The last one was around educator evaluation, and some of the samples that I wanted to provide. We spent almost the entire year working with our district-wide leaders around educator evaluation, and I included some of the goals, and I previously presented on this, I think, with you, and shared some of the data that we had collected, which is up here in this part of the mid-year update. And you can see we actually had a fairly high level reporting that educators felt like this had a positive impact on what they were doing. So we were really excited about that. I think sometimes when districts take up initiatives around educator eval, it's well intended but has poor consequences. And we were really pleased that we were able to have positive consequences and they were aligned with the intentions we set out at the beginning of this process. And some of these documents are just some samples that we wanted to provide you. Just some different workshop slides that we had done so you get a sense of what our work was with our leaders. We also wanted to provide you with the criteria that we had worked on for effective educator goals, because that was an early part of the year's work. The observation write-up guide for evaluators was a way of gaining consistency across all our evaluators in terms of how we talked about teaching and learning with our educators. And then just a sample observation write-up that we had worked with our leadership team on as a way of kind of providing that exemplar about how we give feedback. And I thought it might be interesting because as committee members, you're often not privy to, or not often, you're not privy to educators' evaluations, so you don't get to see how we structure feedback. But I thought it might be insightful for you to actually read a sample of what we've been working toward that our educators might see. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions. As I think everyone had said, these were, the goals that we had set at the beginning of the year that did change substantially as we hit early March. I think as a superintendent of schools, it would be, irresponsible not to consider, closure is certainly, fair game for an evaluation, I would say, because I think, poorly managed, that's a major impact on kids.
I can't see it, but I can. Okay, there we go. Peter, I actually wanted to ask a question with regards to the literacy, and I know we've come to some bit of a standstill, but maybe it's an appropriate time to do it. What I didn't notice in the literacy updates, whatever, and now reflecting back on the mid-year goals was that did we take a survey of what we are doing? I mean, I know we did that with math, and I know that was part of the process for the DMG thing with the SEL is to get a really good understanding of where we are as a district. But I know, for instance, that all 6 of our elementary schools have many varying practices in terms of ELA stuff, and so I'm wondering, I don't see that noted anywhere in there. It's like a comprehensive sort of assessment had been done of where we're starting from. I certainly love seeing all of the things that have been considered in the professional learning that teachers have been exposed to, and I don't have young children, but I tutor many of them, and I've been able to see some of the stuff from the learning boards, which is excellent and certainly reflects a lot of the knowledge that was obviously learned in a lot of the professional learning. But I'm just curious if that was part of the process or if that will be part of the process.
So a survey wasn't put out to all teachers, but certainly that information was gathered by the subcommittee that was working on the evidence-based resources and the different practices. And so that helped inform also the kinds of things that they're recommending going forward, knowing some of the variations and the things that are happening throughout the district, some which are evidence-based and some which are not. So that information was gathered probably on a more informal basis, but we made sure when we put the committees together that we also had representation from all the schools and from many different perspectives.
Okay, thanks. John?
I have 2 questions, and the first one is for you, Tessa. In terms of the form that you actually want us to use to submit feedback for June 5th, in the April 16th packet, there's a PDF, but I'm thinking that's not the form that you actually want feedback on.
So staff, I believe, did send everybody
separately.
Yeah, separately, that was
Okay.
populated with what Peter had put it, like Peter's goals and focus.
Okay, so that's the one. Okay, fine, great, thank you.
But it's populated specific to Peter.
Great.
So
And
you
then
can find that.
the question for Peter is, and it comes back to the question that I asked at the beginning about reopening. And are we going to try and do everything, or are we going to take something off the plate? So with respect to these goals that obviously we're very keen to complete, where do they exist relative to the activities to make sure we have a clean reopening of school? And are these things now that you would say you'd be happy if they were completed by the end of next year, or how should we think about that?
That's a great question. I think the district strategy piece, I can talk to that first, because what's very interesting is the items that go into the district strategy, they haven't changed what we want to do, even with the closure, but the items that we might need to prioritize have changed and shifted and will need to shift. For example, we thought it might be a multi-year project to really think about how we want to build out systems of support and aligning our systems of support. And literacy, mathematics, and social emotional learning was kind of an overarching goal of the strategy, but we really were like, okay, we can do that over the next few years. And, I think what the closure, though, has said is that actually needs to be our #1 priority. So I think what we're trying to do is think about, we don't want to stop work on our goals moving forward, but we need to think about how we prioritize them. My hope is that when we get together for a workshop in the summer, in early summer, that's actually a dialogue that we can have together between superintendent committee and talk about what are our priorities as we head into the next year, and set some expectations. I think the literacy work will probably evolve over the next year, but I think elements of it, and especially around aligning our systems of support, are going to happen much faster than a full year out. So it's hard to say right now, and I apologize for the long-winded answer, but it's nuanced.
Michael?
Peter, maybe I missed. I don't see the evidence for the educator recruitment. I do see the educator growth, and but I don't see the recruitment. So maybe if I missed, so if it's there, then it's fine. But if it's not there, then you may want to add that evidence. The educator recruitment.
That I don't believe.
I think in your initiatives picture, and in the center, you mentioned educator recruitment, educator growth, and something.
Correct.
But when you move the #2, when you provide evidence, and I don't see the recruitment there.
Right. So just to clarify, that is one of our goals in our next strategic plan, but that was not one of the goals we adopted at the beginning of this year for this year's work. We certainly did a lot with it, but I didn't provide evidence because that was not specific to this year's goals.
So Michael, when you look at the summative evaluation that Beth just sent another copy of to everyone, you will see specifically the things that Peter did provide evidence for because they were his goals. So the district strategy was just one of his goals, and within the district strategy, there was lots of things that the district needs to work on over the next 5 years, but those aren't specific to his goals as a superintendent. So he only laid out evidence for the things that will be evaluated for his evaluation. The evaluation is very specific in terms of how Peter lays out his goals and what he has as focus indicators and the ways in which we look at that. So what you're referring to is part of the district strategy and not Peter's superintendent goal.
Do you mean that the recruitment, educator recruitment, is not the goals? That's just it's
that's part of the district strategy goals, which is, you know, meant to last 5 years. That's not part of Peter's superintendent goal.
Can I add something? This is Marie.
Yeah, go right ahead.
Sorry, I can't find my, oh, there's the raised hand. Sorry. I think it might have been in last year's goals that we set a goal of increasing our educators of color by 20% over 3 years. And I know that we reported back to the committee on it, but we were able to hire 6 educators of color just for this year that we're in right now, which actually met the goal in the first year. And we're continuing to do a lot of work around that. I think that's what Michael's referring to. I think it was in the prior year's goals, but it's certainly in the strategic plan as well. So you'll be hearing more about that, but that's just a brief update on where we are with that. I think it was in last year's end of year report.
That's how I remember.
You're right. I think you're right, Marie. And I just wanted to be sure that Michael understands what the specific expectation of the summative evaluation is, because
Well, I do understand, Tessa, but the things that if last year's goal and it's not, it's now, continue to the multiple years. So I'm just, I'm surprised with that. So.
Okay. Angie?
Yes. I have 2 questions. One is for Peter. Maybe you have mentioned it. And it is with the COVID, and there's more students that's at home, they're social distancing, they're distressed. So I'm trying to see during this, when this is going on, and what, I understand there is a wellness page and information that we have on the school website. But is there any, like, a special team to reach out to the student? Because I do hear there are some student that wasn't distressed, but it is somewhat distressed now. So I want to hear if there's a kind of adopted goal or plan along this area. Then I can let you answer this one. The other question is for Don.
I'm not, can you just clarify that? I'm not sure I followed that question completely.
The COVID, the impact on the social wellness of the student that stay at home, basically.
So our counselors do reach out to their students on their caseloads, particularly students who they had concerns about as well, but they also reach out with other students on an as-needed basis. We also have tried to provide a lot of information for families as well, and resources and supports throughout the community, as well as coordinating with the social workers in both towns, making sure that we stay in communication with our police, first responders around those issues. Don, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, all of those things are happening. We provided an update, I think, at the last school committee meeting of all of the ways that our social workers, our psychologists, and our counselors, as well as our nursing staff, are reaching out to families regularly and to students that we have concerns about, as well as our school resource officers have been a tremendous support as well.
Yeah, and actually, Angie, I think if you remember, I think we also presented this at school committee, but we did a survey of community needs that we sent to every family, where they were able to identify what types of resources and supports they needed. And then every family that identified any type of resource, from mental health needs to food insecurity to technology needs, all were filtered to the appropriate staff, who then followed up and addressed those needs, within about 3 days of receiving the results.
Okay. We also have a number of new cases that we've opened up just in the last few weeks with the wraparound services with the Family Success Partnership through Assabet Valley Collaborative as well.
Yeah, okay. So, Tessa, can I have the follow-up question?
If it's quick.
Okay. So, Don, this is kind of like the question responding to your tier 1, tier 2, and putting labels on the kids. So I'm just kind of thinking about the question, because we don't want to put labels on the kids, but at the same time, I'm more questioning on what is our philosophical how we solve the problem. Are we trying to remove all the obstacles for the students so they don't have any kind of differences, or are we giving strengths? We're trying to build the strengths for the students so they're able to conquering the challenge, because there are two different philosophical way to solve the problem. So I'm trying to see where our district is going and how because we want to build the grit for our student. We want to build the strengths for our student, be able to build them up and be able to set the goal and be able to conquering any challenge they're facing. I kind of feel that because maybe you understand my question,
I do. It's a really good question. And you're absolutely, I think, yes to both of those things. We absolutely want to be able to push kids as far as we can push them. We want every single student to have access to rigorous curriculum and materials and expectations and instruction. And at the same time, we want to make sure that they have the supports that they need to be able to access and engage with all of those rigorous pieces that we bring to them. So I think it's an and for sure. For us, and I don't know if you want to add anything there, Deb, but for me, it's definitely an and I do think that our general education teachers, if we can have more of our students spending more time in general education for a whole host of reasons, our general education teachers know our kids. They know them so incredibly well. And so they're really best positioned to be able to sort of know what they can push on and how to support kids. So it's never a goal of, removing labels to take away supports. It's really about looking at the fact that each kid is a unique learner and that we don't necessarily need to put labels on kids to get them the supports that they need.
So it's really about knowing our students and knowing them well. As John was saying, what are their needs, what are their strengths, where they need to be challenged. What happens with labels, unfortunately, is that connotes certain things and creates a mindset for all of us around a student's capabilities and what they can and what they can't do. And so by removing the label and talking about it more around what kinds of supports do students need in terms of intensity of instruction or time commitment, that allows them the environment to shift to meet the student's needs, as opposed to asking the child to fit into a square box, around the label. So it's really just a little bit of a tweak in the system and how we approach the work.
Okay, thank you.
Paul? Paul, you're muted.
I know, yeah. I wasn't going to say anything, but with that question, I applaud the sensitivity to the label issue, because I think that's very important. And I know, well, in the age of multiple intelligences, what I worry about is that some students that are perform very well with a certain aspect of curriculum, they may gravitate to that, label themselves as successful, but not focus on other types of intelligence that might also be critical. So I applaud the district for having some sensitivity to the label issue. And my hope is that trickles down into the students' mindset where they don't self-label.
All right. So with no other hands up, so June 5th is the date when I would like you to submit your completed written evaluations to me. Public input is also going to be accepted until June 5th. So if anyone in the public has comments that they would like me to include in the evaluation, in the composite evaluation that I'm going to put together, then please email those to either me at tmckinley@abschools.org, not either to me and to Beth, so B. Petter at abschools.org, and we will incorporate those into the composite evaluation that I put together after I've received everybody. Does anybody have additional questions about the process? Okay, super. Then I think we can move on to new business. So we're just short of an hour late. So policy subcommittee is up first, and actually given the time and the fact that we still have things to talk about. I'm going to ask that we move the third read of the graduation requirements to June 4th. I know that we had made some of the changes in accordance with things that Diane had shared with us, and since she's not here tonight, I think I'd rather have that discussion when she is present. So tonight we have first readings of 3 policies: use of facilities, policy development, and annual organizational meeting. So Amy, do you want to speak?
Yep. So for the first one, use of school facilities, this is a first read. The only change that is being asked, we're asking you to make, is that the removal of the lower fields are managed outside of school hours by the Friends of Leary Fields. And that's simply because the Friends of Leary Field are no longer doing that. So that's the change there. If there aren't any questions, I'll keep going.
I think you can go ahead. Yep, go ahead.
Okay, so the second one is file BG, School Committee Policy Development. And you can see some of the changes that we made there. Marie, do you want to speak to this? Why this is being reevaluated?
One of the big changes was simply to make it, it's sort of a little change, but make it so that if there are typographical errors or changes of a word or two, that those changes can be made without a first and second read and a vote of the committee. So housekeeping changes, we would call them, can be made by the policy subcommittee, and then the school committee would be notified. I think that was sort of the main change. Ginny is the one who drafted this. I don't know if there was anything else.
Ginny, do you want to say anything? You're muted.
No, I just took regular housekeeping language that is used just generally in Massachusetts. I don't think there's, I mean, it kind of speaks for itself. If anybody has questions, I'm happy to answer them. But
it appears that we're good. So if anyone has comments on either one of those two, you can send them along to Amy, and they'll be shared with the policy subcommittee as they look at them again before we have a second read. Right,
okay. The final one is file BDA, School Committee Annual Organizational Meeting. And this has been brought up because the change that needs to be made is that according to Boxborough rules, new members can be sworn in after the election. But in Acton, new members can only be sworn in at the end of town meeting. So we took off took out that line and just added at the first regularly scheduled school committee meeting after all new members have been sworn in, instead of saying the first meeting after both town meetings. And I think that's it. That's the only big change that we made. Sorry. Well, go ahead.
Well, no, go ahead and finish.
We had already made the change, the annual organizational meeting, the interim period, and that the actual change would be made on August 1st. So that's not new information. That was done last year.
Right, and I was going to say a lot of what we discussed last time, and which I think we shall continue to discuss, probably is really procedural around how we hold that organizational meeting. It was suggested that it probably be best that we still do it all in one meeting so that the decision really remains that of the committee without public input into who the public might have an interest in being chair or vice chair or what have you. And it was suggested that in order to really maintain the committee's integrity and their choice for who would be serve as chair and vice chair, that we do that just in one meeting. But the other things are procedural. I know that that there are different ways of voting, things that we haven't considered, but that don't necessarily need to be part of a policy, whether we do a voice vote or a ballot vote, that there have been questions regarding if that's the right thing to do. So my understanding is, Amy, when we spoke earlier, is it your interest that maybe the procedures and thoughts on procedures go to policy and then be brought to the next meeting?
Yeah, so policy's gonna try to meet before our June 4th, 5th meeting, the next meeting in June. And we'll come back with a list of procedures. So nothing would change unless I get a lot of feedback on this policy, and hopefully we can vote the policy next time. But along with the policy, we would like to bring along procedures that can then be discussed in an open meeting. And I'll add another thought about, I think is important, is that just to making these decisions all within one meeting, I think it's also important to kind of keep everything open and public right then and there. So there isn't any kind of behind the scenes campaigning or talking, or, I think it should all just be really open so everyone can see it right there. So I guess questions.
Angie?
Yeah, I have a clarification question. So I remember the chair that is kind of alternating. So that's not in
that's not actually part of the policy, and it never has been. That's just a practice that has been.
Oh, okay, okay.
And when I brought it up at the last meeting, it seemed that most people were not so hung up on it going Acton Boxborough for different kinds of reasons. And so what we had discussed, and I know that some of the thoughts heading into procedures would be that definitely that people would put their interests forward rather than just being nominated by someone from discussions that had happened behind the scenes. That people would be able to put forth their interest in being chair or vice chair or whatever it is, and that the committee members would be able to consider and discuss and then make a decision. Adam, did you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question about sort of what our next procedure would be for this. We said that the policy committee will meet again, and then ironically, we just talked about a policy that says the procedures are set by the superintendent. In this case, our organizing procedure is going to be first draft produced by the policy subcommittee, and then will come back to us, and will we vote this procedure? And then my second part of the question is how, or what's the method with which we can give some feedback on how we think that procedure should work?
I think that if you have thoughts on that, you should email it to me and to Tessa and copy Beth on it. I don't know. We don't vote on procedures, but in this particular case, I don't know. We'll have to look into that a little bit more to see kind of what would be the right thing to do there.
Great. I mean, I agree that it's probably the policy committee that should write this procedure because it falls under a similar bailiwick. I'm just curious then how we go about sort of getting consensus on that and moving forward with it.
Yep.
So the good news is we can't do any of this until July because Acton members. So we do have a little bit of time. Paul, I saw your hand up.
I just thought that our standard procedure is to adopt the policy and then the procedures follow from the policy.
Well,
I think the question here is more that we should agree, we should come to some kind of consensus, since this is our reorganizational meeting. This is how we choose to reorganize each year, that it should be a committee kind of consensus on how the procedure that we go with.
John?
So I think it is important to have a procedure that ideally is known going into the organizational meeting, and hopefully what will come out of the policy subcommittee will be not controversial. So when people see it in the packet, they'll go like, oh yeah, this is a good way to do it, and we'll be all set. But if it should turn out that, people really do want to talk about the procedure, it seems to me that even if we're up against it in the organizational meeting, there's no requirement that we immediately have the first item of the organizational meeting be the election of the new chair. it could be the discussion of the procedure. We could agree the procedure, and then we can go ahead and do the actual election of the chair and the vice chair.
Well, and because we changed the policy last year to have the actual term not end until August 1st, that also gives us a little bit of cushion in terms of choosing a chair and then making the transition to a new chair. Michael?
Oh yeah, I want to piggyback what Paz just said. I want to, probably policy is more important. So let so that the procedure can follow the policy.
Okay. So I think that is everybody that had a question. So thank you for the work, Amy, and the policy subcommittee.
The whole committee. The whole committee did, but yeah.
So we will look forward to hearing from you at the next meeting.
Great,
so if you
thanks.
on any of those policies or the procedures with regards to the organization, then send them along to Amy. Okay, ongoing business. So we have minutes to approve from May 7th. There were 3 comments received from members since the draft minutes were posted on Friday. They've been included in the currently posted version with tracked changes.
I move to approve the Acton Boxborough Regional School Committee minutes of May 7th as amended.
Second.
All right, we will take a roll call vote if there's no discussion. I don't see any. John?
Yes.
Paul?
Yes.
Angie?
Yes.
Ginny?
Yes.
Amy?
Yes.
Maya?
Yes.
Michael?
Yes.
Adam?
Yes.
And me? Yes. Okay, those are approved unanimously. I'm not missing, Nora left, right, because she was having, I don't see her. I just want to make sure I didn't miss her. Okay, so we have a budget update from Dave.
So, Tessa?
Yeah.
I just have one thought. So the update on the financial position of EDCO, I'm wondering how you would feel about moving that prior to the budget update. And the reason being, we had a board meeting today, and I was talking with Nadine Ekstrom, who's the executive director. So she's here in the audience, just in case the committee members have any questions that she can help to answer. And she's been sitting here patiently for a couple hours, I think. So just in deference to her being able to go home. Well, she's probably home, but
it's absolutely fine. It's absolutely fine. Sure, right? So that's fine. So we'll move item 6.3 in front of item 6.2. So that's fine.
all right. So as I said, we are fortunate Nadine is here in the audience. So if you have questions as this goes, I'm happy to promote her to be a panelist, and she can respond to questions. As you're aware, I've been updating you on the financial position of EDCO over the last several meetings. And this was in, response to some concerns that originally had gone to the board earlier in the year, I think in December, when we got the audit reports from the prior year, where we realized there was a larger deficit than had been anticipated. And so that evolved over the course of the year, and the EDCO administrative team had actually put in place many cost-saving measures in FY20 to close that deficit. However, when all of our schools, including collaboratives, closed due to COVID-19, there was a significant loss of revenue at EDCO. They rent space, they host conferences, they put on professional development workshops for districts, and many of those got canceled, which resulted in a very sharp decline in revenue to the collaborative. That put the collaborative in very serious financial position. And Nadine and her team have been working to remedy that and to prepare an FY21 budget that balances and is based on realistic revenue assumptions over the next year. I think as we've gone, I've been satisfied with the steps. And as you know, Dave Vertolino, I had Dave Vertolino attend a meeting of all the business directors of districts that belong to EDCO. And they had their own opportunity to ask questions. And coming out of that meeting, both Dave and I were satisfied that the measures that EDCO had taken were putting it into a positive financial situation. We did, as an EDCO board, agree to an additional assessment for all districts during the current year. For us, that was about a $20,000 assessment. But what that allowed the collaborative to do was to close the current fiscal year out and have sufficient cash flow to maintain the organization until the next round of grants started to come in, which typically happens in early fall. During that time, there's a lot of uncertainty with the board, and since the last update, 3 school committees have now voted to have their districts withdraw from EDCO as a collaborative. Those 3 districts that have now provided notice of withdrawal are Lexington, Concord Carlisle, and Belmont. So they have voted to withdraw, and there's a process that the board will undertake to consider that. In addition, however, Lexington has also requested that the EDCO board consider termination of the collaborative as an option. And so with that, I thought it was really important at this point to engage you in a dialogue around that and provide you with an assessment of what risk there might be for Acton Boxborough in the event that either districts withdraw from EDCO or in the event that the collaborative votes to terminate. So in preparation for that, I sent you a memo from our attorney that outlines the steps that happen. And if it's not posted now, this will be posted. It says privilege, but we have the permission of our attorney to share it because I think this is germane to the public discussion of this. But basically what happens when a district withdraws from EDCO, there is a process for determining all of their liabilities. And essentially the EDCO agreement that we've all signed on to says that a district is responsible for all of the liabilities for any period of time in which they were a member of that collaborative. So if a district withdraws now, that does not absolve them of their liabilities to the collaborative. From that standpoint, what it doesn't mean is all of a sudden Acton Boxborough is now liable for all of the other district members' share of the liabilities. In addition, there's an opinion about what happens to liabilities should the collaborative terminate. The EDCO attorney had given us a position that had said that the liabilities essentially end with the organization. Our attorney understands that position and recognizes that position, however, believes that it's much more nuanced and that even though that may be the legal position, there is nothing stopping any entity from coming after, from a legal standpoint, the member districts for their share of that liability. So I've provided you that opinion, and I think it's germane because I think as we consider, and you consider what you want to do in terms of remaining in the organization, it's an important concept to understand the risk to the district. I think at this point, my assessment is that I apologize. I'm going to highlight one more document that I sent you, and that was a spreadsheet of EDCO estimated closing costs. And I apologize, these weren't in the packet, but a lot of this information is just coming to us because it's very, very new. This was developed by the business department and along with the EDCO attorney to understand what the liabilities are when a collaborative closes. Essentially, if we voted to terminate EDCO, each member district would be responsible for its proportionate share of the liabilities upon closing. So the list is not complete because it doesn't account for OPEB because there are a lot of actuarial nuances to how you would account for OPEB should the collaborative close. For example, you all of a sudden don't have employees, however, you still have retirees who are collecting benefits. So that's in itself a very, very long drawn out process just to calculate that liability. But there are other liabilities of the organization right now totaling about $6.5 million total. If we were to terminate, the way the proceeding works is we would have to take that vote during this fiscal year and that would terminate the organization at the end of FY21. So it's a full year process, and that's essentially because everything in EDCO has to be accounted for, and then there's a process for dissolving to get there. What that means is, I believe we're roughly 25, 26% of the EDCO assessment in terms of proportionate share, just because of the size of our district. It might be a little bit less, but we are a substantial amount of that. So, unfortunately, in the event of termination, our share of the liability is probably in the very high hundreds of thousands of dollars. At this point, it's leading me to believe that our best bet is to continue to try and support EDCO in turning the financial ship around so that, we're not caught with this type of a liability, because I would be very concerned about having a $700,000 or $800,000 liability that hits us at the end of FY21 or beginning of FY22, because that's actually the time period we're most concerned about given the financial crisis. I think the immediate danger of continuing, should the collaborative not have a balanced budget over the next year, there could be an additional assessment like we just paid, but that's maybe $20,000 if you go by this year's number. I'm not saying that's the case. I think, Nadine and her team are taking every reasonable step to get the budget to align. But again, that we didn't plan on the closure either, and that impacted us in ways we didn't expect. But I guess my personal opinion, and I can have Dave weigh in on this too, is I would rather have a risk of a $20,000 liability or something on that magnitude rather than planning for, a multiple $100,000 liability coming at us in the next fiscal year. I do think Nadine and her team are taking the appropriate steps. I think that the collaborative has to think deeply about what strategy it wants to pursue as a longer, mid and long-term goals to make sure that it's going to be viable. And that's something, I think the board really needs to work with Nadine on as we progress over time. So I'm happy to take questions from you. My goal out of this conversation, we're not requesting a vote tonight to either withdraw from EDCO or to terminate. However, what I am hoping to do is understand from you if you want to have that on a subsequent agenda as a possible vote to either withdraw or to terminate, because that is really a school committee level decision. But I wanted to give you my professional opinion as well as the option to put that onto a future agenda. If the consensus or there is an interest from committee members of having that on the agenda, we would put that on the June 4th agenda for action, as well as follow-up discussion. Again, if you want, I can have Dave chime in, or if you have any questions for Nadine, I know she's happy to answer any as well.
All right. John, I saw your hand up first.
So in order to figure out what the financial lay of the land looks like, if Lexington, Concord, Carlisle, and Belmont follow through with the withdrawal, how many members will be left, and what percentage of EDCO do those three entities represent?
So the entire EDCO budget is about a $9.5 million budget, and I'm actually I just promoted Dave to a panelist. I'm going to promote Nadine to the panelist as well, because she may want to speak to this. The entire EDCO budget is about a $9.5 million budget. The total of all the member community assessments, I believe, is about 180,000 of that. So the actual assessments are a very small percentage of the overall budget. So, the model that Nadine has shown us right now is actually, rather than redistributing the assessments to the rest of the member districts, she's actually just counting the loss of assessments as lost revenue. And that means making other decisions around programming and goals of the collaborative and other parts of the budget. But, Nadine, I don't know if you want to talk to that briefly.
Yes, thank you, Peter, and hello, everybody. So the difference actually is just under 23% of the total assessments at the loss. So what I did was I calculated our assessments that we receive is $186,973, With the reduction of those districts, it brings it down to $142,742. So my thought is, out of that 40-something thousand dollars, that I work closely with the board members to get strategic about what does that mean. And in essence, it's actually less than a full out-of-district tuition placement. It's 1/2 of 1 year of a tuition placement. So one of the pieces that we talk about is, if you have somebody that's going in and out of district and we happen to have the program, try to think of us as your plan A rather than your plan B or plan C. That's one option. Another option is just looking at some of our professional development, and maybe we have to do a cost analysis of some of our professional development opportunities that we offer. Might be less than what we really could be asking for. So there's just different things that we could be looking at for that.
Michael, did you have a question?
Yes, I do. So my question is that, for because Lexington, suggests to terminate this article. So, so Peter, do you know other remaining, schools that are still in the article? What do they think?
So, I think where we're at right now is some of the superintendents still have to go back to their committees to get the sense. For example, when I said it today, I could offer my own personal opinion, but I was cautious not to try and represent our school district because that's a decision of the committee here. And so, I think my gut is that based on the dialogue I heard today, most of the superintendents and school committee members who make up the board there are supportive of continuing with EDCO and remaining members of the collaborative, with the exception of those 3 that have already voted. I have not gotten a sense from the other member districts that any of the board members, at least at EDCO, are planning on asking their committees to withdraw actively. So that doesn't mean, however, that their own personal school committees might feel differently and might say, look, we think we should withdraw, so here's the vote, and then the board member has to kind of represent the district. So it's complicated, and I think we'll know more probably in 2 weeks than we know now. But that's kind of where we stand. Nadine, I don't know if you have any other.
Yeah, I would say just to clarify though, Peter, that Concord Carlisle, it was actually Concord and Concord Carlisle because they're the same superintendent. So I just want to clarify that just for purposes. But the other 12 districts, I'm not getting the sense of withdrawal. If anything, I think today's conversation that we had at the meeting, and Peter, correct me if you think I'm wrong, but I kind of get the sense there that people were saying we need to be in this together. We need to work on this and support the action. A lot of these things are before I got there, and they're just coming into fruition now. And so I think from what I see from the other 12 districts is to say, let's see how we can be creative. It's an opportunity to maybe rebrand or redesign or restructure and bring in a new EDCO. The sad part is EDCO has been in business for 51 years. It's the second longest collaborative in the state, in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And through those 51 years, there's been good years and bad years all the way through. I think what's happened, what we're realizing is that there's been some financial issues that haven't always come to light to the board until recently we've been able to discover some concerns.
Adam?
Yeah, I was originally going to ask why is Lexington recommending the closure, but upon further thinking, I don't think it matters because my opinion is that it's important for all of us to consider the importance of the importance and value of the collaborative that it brings to our community, regardless of what we have for enrollment from our own student body. And so I think that, my personal opinion would be that it's important to keep the collaborative up and running to support those students who need the services that it provides if and when they need those services.
I think something that Peter shared with me, which is also important to understand, is the other reasons that our district primarily takes advantage of EDCO services is in a lot of the roundtables and professional learning opportunities that they provide. you know, that's something that is important to our district and something that we take advantage of quite a bit, at least from my understanding. Angie, did you have a question? You're muted. You're muted, Angie.
Yeah. Peter, can you give me the two numbers? One is the number to continue as member versus the number that we're out, those two numbers.
Yeah, so I'm going to say, you know, I'll give you the number if we chose to, if the organization terminated, then the number is right now is listed as $6.5 million. However, I'm going to say that needs to be taken with some grain of salt on a positive and negative side. One, OPEB liability is not calculated into that, and you know they have a liability, but the organization also has a trust, and there's going to be quite an actuarial process to understand how you calculate OPEB for an organization that doesn't exist anymore, potentially. So that's unknown at this point. You know, there's also needs to be a greater study done of some of the longer term contracts that EDCO has. And I think that's something that's still to be determined. And in all honesty, we asked our DESE representative that oversees all the collaboratives in the state about that today. And, you know, she said the last collaborative that shut down actually took a full year of basically the board meeting 1 and 2 times a month. And every meeting they had, the numbers changed. So it's not going to be hard and fast. And then a big ticket item in there is cost of breaking the lease on EDCO's rental space. And that's right now listed at $3 million, but that also assumes an 11-year lease period, I believe. And in all honesty, I think it would be likely that that number would come down through the process because I just think that a landlord's not going to leave that space empty for the next 11 years waiting for a tenant. So I think there's probably some negotiation to be done there. You know, I don't have, Nadine, do you happen to know our proportion or percentage of the total assessments?
Your assessment, you're 7.5%.
7.5. We're one of the larger assessments in it. So right now, you know, 7.5% of $6 million or $6.5 million, you can, you know, probably I would put it between $550,000 and $650,000, probably best guess, to give a range.
That's assuming resolve it. If we're not participating.
Right. If we chose not to participate, then essentially what happens next year, we still wouldn't be able to withdraw until a full year from now. So we would still be members next year. We would pay the assessment next year. And upon withdrawal, we would still own our proportional share of all liabilities. So the liabilities don't leave Acton Boxborough just because we withdraw. Just like Lexington might withdraw now, but if, you know, a year from now, the collaborative does end up terminating, then Lexington still owes their proportionate share of the liabilities. The only difference is they don't have a vote on the board anymore in terms of determining how that comes out. So, you know, I don't know. Dave, do you have any thoughts in terms of risk from a financial standpoint?
No, Dave, actually, before you answer, Peter, what you asked us at the beginning was whether or not we wanted to have on the agenda an additional meeting where we have a vote about whether or not we want to withdraw. So I mean, it's 9:45. I just want, and we haven't even done Dave's budget presentation. I guess I'd rather get a consensus of the committee if this is something that we want to consider, because I really think that in order to have a real discussion about this, we would have to have much more of a presentation with regards to the pros and cons of our participation in it and whatnot. I mean, it's not something that we can decide in like 5 minutes. So I guess the question of the committee is, do we have a consensus that we want to have a further discussion about withdrawing, about I mean, do we want to have this on a future agenda to have a more in-depth discussion where we can really look at all of the pros and cons? John?
I think we absolutely should have it on a future agenda, you know, so that the outcome, you know, is either the decision to withdraw or the decision to affirm, you know, the importance of the EDCO collaborative and our membership in it. And the school committee absolutely should be on record one way or the other.
Okay. Michael, did you have something to contribute to that?
Yeah, I want it to be listed in the future meeting agenda, so we can have more discussion.
So then I think we'll stop the discussion there, and Peter and you and I can discuss how to work that into a future event.
Sounds good. All right, thank you. Nadine, thank you so much for coming.
Absolutely. And if you would like me to come to the future meeting, feel free to invite me. I always love to be able to see the Acton Boxborough School Committee and some of the administration that I've gotten to know over the last few years. So thank you very much.
Thanks,
Thank you, Nadine, for taking the time to attend. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Bye-bye now.
Bye. Okay. Dave, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but now's your turn.
That's okay, thanks. Will I be able to share a screen?
You will.
Say when.
When? Sorry.
So I can see it. Does everybody else see what I'm seeing? A PowerPoint?
Yeah.
Okay. So Peter alluded to it earlier in his remarks, and it looks to me like as I go to, let's see if we can, there we go. Okay, so I think you see my notes on your screen as well, so I should be able to fly through these since you see what I was intending to say as you looked at the pictures. This is where we left off budget-wise, 3.29% increase from FY20. That was the voted budget, 93,974,000, and that was before we added the first-year debt service. Which it's important for me to make that distinction just to give some comparability to this. And 3.29 was higher than the historically low budget increase year over year in FY 2019, but it's still less than the historical average since full regionalization.
If you go into presentation mode, it'll be bigger and your notes won't be there.
Presentation mode.
Go to slideshow at the top. And from the current slide, second one over. There you go.
Now I can't see. I can't see my notes. That's okay. It's late. So the administration did a brainstorming on what could we do to adjust the budget recommendation based on the uncertainties, the anticipation of a recession brought on by what's underlying. We're all watching from our homes tonight, and this is that list. It's a total of 8 items in the first phase of an adjustment process, and you can see them. I'm not gonna walk through them all. Most of them are fairly self-explanatory, and you'll notice that the first item and this item adds up to $500,000, and I call it an offset to additional expenses, which I'll explain in the next slide. The total from the previous slide is about $1.8 million. Adjusting the budget that was passed in March would bring us down to $90,966,000, or an increase of 2.18%. So under 2.2% over FY20. Again, that's before the Gates Douglas first-year bond, but 2.18 is a smaller increase than we had in FY 2019. I just want to stress that that's putting it into context historically before we add in the first-year debt on the school project. And then Peter referred to this. We're looking at adding back a contingency fund relating to costs that we don't know yet. And I heard earlier tonight things that we don't know, and that's That's this bucket. And we don't even know the cost, but we've estimated it at $500,000. And this would be an add back. So to the extent that we're probably going to accelerate the capital items by 200,000. To the extent we don't need to use the reserves because we use less than $500,000 in this contingency, good for us. But we wanted to have the wherewithal to be able to pay for things that we can anticipate that we will be spending additional funds, but not necessarily yet on what. And so the net of those two things comes out to $508,000, a decrease in the budget. There was the budget that was voted in March. That was the increase then. If we take $508,000, here's the resulting amount. And that is a 2.73% increase. I'm not sure. Oh, it's 2.73 because 2.18 was with the whole $1 million out, and 2.73 is adding back the contingency of $500,000. Sorry about that. It seemed confusing. So 2.73% with the contingency, and then here's an analysis of the year-to-year comparable amounts without the first year debt service, and here are the amounts with the first year debt service. So back in March, we had anticipated a 7.08% budget increase. With the net adjustments, it's now at a 6.52% increase. And the town meeting budget request would be $96,912,000. How that breaks down for the assessment, there you can see the original voted assessment and the share between Acton and Boxborough, 7.8% increase in Acton. With the recommended adjustment becomes 7.1%. 5.9% increase for Boxborough. With the recommended adjustment becomes 5.1%. And notably, no change in revenues and use of E&D. I'll make a comment about that in a minute. Just for those who see it visually and favor looking at it on a percentage basis, here's what the numbers were before the original vote without the new debt service and revised. Here are the numbers before with the first year debt service and revised. If we were not building a new school, this would have resulted in a 1.42% increase. Would have resulted in a 2.36% increase on Acton's assessment and a 0.53% increase on Boxborough's assessment. And then you can see the numbers with the new school debt. If you are so inclined, I put recommended vote language, but we'll leave it at this. We'll leave it at this for now. What I'll say relative to the fact that we made budget adjustments on the expense side, but not the revenue side, we have about 5 main components, and they're very decreasingly important in the scheme of things. And we did not touch them, obviously, except for the assessment. We don't have a basis for making a change as yet. There's a lot of speculation and likelihood that the state will reduce local aid to cities, towns, and districts in FY21. By how much? We don't know. We are of the opinion that the state is waiting for word from the federal government on how much money they're to receive in relief, and will base their cut to school districts on how much federal money they can use to backfill it and soften the blow to the to cities, towns, and school districts in the state. Some of the lesser important revenue sources, again, if there is some risk, but they're small in comparison to the overall budget picture. And one other item is that there are some sources of federal funding that are available to us as a district. The ESSER funds, ESSER, pronounced ESSER funding, is worth $114,000 to us. We have accounted for that in our adjustment summary. It's right here. And so that's one piece that we know is available to us. There is a FEMA grant opportunity that we've already we've already gotten ourselves in on, and we are accounting for costs that we intend to submit for reimbursement in a FEMA grant. These are sunk costs of ours, or costs that we expect to pay either through the ordinary course or as part of this contingency that might be reimbursable under the FEMA grant. Those things will help to soften any impact of lost revenue next year, in my opinion. So just as we've not accounted for any potential revenue reductions, we've also not accounted for any potential revenue additions from these various federal grant sources. So that's where we are at this point.
All right. Does anyone have questions for Dave? Michael?
Hey, Dave, I have a question. Because we are going to have $500,000 deposit into the END fund or some other fund?
Are you talking about the 500,000 on this slide?
Yeah, add back this contingency.
No, the add back just relates to the math on the slide and having a $1.8 million adjustment net out to a 508,000 adjustment. That'll be a cost that we'll identify. We'll give it a visible name in the scheme of things. I don't think we're able to break it down among its components, but it'll be a line item in next year's budget to which we can charge costs exactly how it's listed there. School opening costs of distance learning, potentially increased staff, cleaning of buildings, etc., that we don't anticipate now and that certainly weren't included in the budget that was presented to you in previous.
We are talking about that $500,000. That's blue ones, right? We're talking about that $500,000, that blue ones, right? The second,
yes,
the bottom second row, right?
That's an expense.
Do we have this line item in the FY21 budget that add back contingency? Those items?
It's not been in anything you've seen to this point because this was irrelevant to anything until now. This is a line item that'll be in, if you so vote, that'll be in the budget for next year, to which we can charge these unanticipated costs related to opening school back.
So that will be included into that your recommended vote, right? That.
Yes.
Okay. Got it. Thank you.
Paul?
So I just wanted to thank you for putting your time and effort into this. And I very much appreciate the way you've laid it out. And I think the holdback of the 500,000 is a smart thing to do.
Thanks, Paul. All right, so I don't actually see other questions. So if we want to vote to approve the recommended budget revisions, there is, well, slides 9 and 10. So do you have slides 9 and 10 in there, Dave? Right. So if you want, if we would like to move forward with this, then I need a motion to for this recommended vote. And I can't see anybody, so I also don't see any hands. There we go. Okay, John.
I move that the total appropriation for the Acton Boxborough Regional School District for the fiscal year July 1st, 2020 through June 30th, 2021 be set at $96,912,701, and that the member towns be assessed in accordance with the Education Reform Law and the terms of the regional agreement and amendments thereto as follows. Acton, $65,584,049, consisting of a capital assessment of $5,325,309 and an operating assessment of $60,258,741, and Boxborough $12,123,116, consisting of a capital assessment of $878,800 and an operating assessment of $11,244,315, with the remainder to be accounted for by the following sources of funds. Anticipated Chapter 78 in the amount of $15,345,811. Anticipated Chapter 71, Section 16C Transportation Aid of $2,097,225. Anticipated charter school aid in the amount of $50,000. Anticipated Medicaid reimbursement of $250,000. Anticipated investment earnings of $300,000. Estimated miscellaneous revenues of $17,500, and transfer from E&D reserve in the amount of $1,145,000.
Second.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Ginny. Is there any additional discussion? Michael?
Hey, Dev, so in this motion, do we have to, list that $500,000 that line item for edback contingency?
No, Michael, that 500,000 is part of the 96,912,000 that you see, the first red number on that slide.
So how that line item will be added into the revised, the FY budget? Because if we don't have this line item, then you're not going to be authorized to spend, right?
So the budget is 96,912,701. If that's approved, if the assessments are approved by both towns, then our budget will be funded, and we will set up a line item in that budget of $500,000.
When you go to the town meetings,
the town meeting will have. If you vote this tonight, we're gonna redo the budget presentation, the detailed budget presentation. So there'll be a single line item that'll stand out very prominently, $500,000.
And that will go to the town meeting for approval, right?
The town meeting won't approve the 500,000 specifically, but
yeah, definitely. I just when you go to the town meeting, that line item will be there.
Yes.
In the budget.
Yes.
Okay. Dave, I need you to stop sharing your screen in order for us to vote because I can't see anybody.
Okay. How's that?
Thank you. All right. All right. Adam.
Yes.
Maya.
Yes.
Amy.
Yes.
Angie.
Yes.
Paul.
Yes.
John.
Yes.
Ginny.
Yes.
Michael.
Yes.
Me. Yes. Okay. That passes.
Bless you.
I thought that was like someone cheering. I was like, wow, okay, that's a lot of excitement over a vote. All right, so then we have, is this an additional part of the presentation, Dave, the part about the 112 budget?
So the only thing that I think you have, and I could be wrong about this, is I think you have wording relative to a vote to authorize the superintendent.
Yep. So it is on as item 6.2.2 on the agenda.
So what I'll say about it is this week, it's my understanding that both Acton and Boxborough have set dates for town meeting, and notably both of them are scheduled to occur in June. If either, as I've said to you before, if either town does not hold a town meeting or doesn't pass a budget, let's take doesn't pass a budget out of the equation because that regular rules apply there. If neither town holds a town meeting before the end of June, then the state would be in a position to authorize us to go forward with what's called a 1/12 budget. We will need to submit an application for that by June 1st. The format is supposed to be, I've been trading emails with the person at at DESE about this, and the form might be available tomorrow. We need to submit it. It should be pretty perfunctory for us to submit. It's looking for FY20 budget information. And what that will do is it'll allow the director of the bureau, whether it's DOR or DESE, I'm not even sure who makes the final call on this. They would authorize us to be able to spend on a 1/12 basis into July, which is legal authority to spend. Suffice to say that if both towns hold their town meetings and pass their budgets, including the assessments that are underlying the vote you took tonight, this has no bearing whatsoever to the district. And so I'm encouraged the fact that both towns want to try and pursue this before the end of June, and if it happens, it's moot. I think we still should make the application. The deadline is June 1st, and
right. So this is a just in case. We're doing it as a just in case.
We're doing it as just in case because they've said you should apply. You should make this application by June 1st. If the worst happens and either town or both towns are not ready to go, and we just cavalierly said, we're probably going to be okay, we will be at the bottom of the list as far as approval process at that point. Right?
Okay, so I will entertain a motion. Adam.
I move to authorize the superintendent, if applicable, to expend funds approved through the authorization of the so-called 1/12 budget for the district by the Department of Government.
Second.
Michael?
You're calling me?
Sorry.
Voting.
Is there any additional discussion? Sorry. And no. So yes, Michael, I'm calling on you to vote.
You're calling me? Sorry.
I'm calling on you to vote, yes.
Yes.
Jenny? You're muted.
Yes.
Angie?
Sorry.
Yes.
Paul?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Amy?
Yes.
Maya?
Yes.
Adam?
Yes.
And me, yes. Okay, that also passes unanimously. Luckily, we already did 6.3, so we don't need to do that. Thank you, Dave, for those presentations about budget. Very understandable, as always. Okay, so school building committee update. Peter? You're muted. You're muted. Sorry.
School building committee continues to meet. We're going to begin drilling test geothermal wells soon. We finished the value management phase to reduce the project budget back to the voted amount, and that has gone to MSBA for approval. We also have the design development phase is also at MSBA for their review and comment, and we are awaiting word back from them. I don't know if anyone else has anything to add on that.
I do. I just want to commend the work of both the owner's project manager and architect, and then the difficult work of the committee to bring the price back down to what we had targeted. And I think that they did a really great job of identifying areas where we could save costs without affecting the program that will be delivered in the building.
Okay. ALG. Amy, you're listed on the agenda. I don't know if you're the one that gets to report on that.
I can say, yeah, ALG met, I think it was yesterday morning. I don't know what day it is. So, and we basically, Peter shared what Dave shared today. I mean, not in so much detail, but in general terms, the town shared some adjustments that they're going to be making to their budgets. And the next meeting is planned on June the 4th to kind of talk after all the committees have been able to vote on these adjusted budgets. And town meeting is scheduled for the last week of June. They're still working out the details, but it's going to be a very limited agenda. there are very limited warrants on there. And I guess, unless I forgot something, that's about it.
BLF met on the 12th with their pre-town meeting, and it's going to be held at the Boxborough Regency, and they laid out the plans for, oh, am I frozen? No, some people are frozen. Deb's moving and Amy's moving, but everyone else is frozen. So they laid out plans for how we're going to sit and things like that. It's stuff that they've been considering. The Boxborough, the town election is not going to be held at Town Hall. It will instead be at Blanchard, but they are encouraging people to vote ahead of time. So the BLF meeting really was just sort of a discussion of what it might look like and what expectations were for different presentations. Short and sweet was about the message. All right, Capital Improvement Subcommittee, Adam.
Yeah, so Capital Improvement Subcommittee met last week, Tuesday. We reviewed the results of the bond sale with that committee, which again, as you all know, were quite favorable. And having that money now has actually been really helpful because it allows us to both accelerate the projects that the district's working on, but it also has been really helpful to support our current budget situation. As you saw, about $350,000 of next year's budget is coming out of funds that would have been appropriated for capital improvement. None of the projects are being affected by that. It's just the ability to prepay some of that this year. Dave's giving me a funny face. And be able to do some of the projects this year and then use that bond money for some of the other projects. Projects are still moving forward. Notably, there's a project to redesign the HVAC controls at Blanchard, and there's paving that I'm sure many of you have seen at the R.J. Gray. And the next big work project is the paving on Charter Road, which I'm sure we'll come back to you with some more information on shortly.
Great. Okay, we're almost done, guys. So the if there's budget, I don't think budget. There's anything additional.
Tessa?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment because the flow of this was obviously very much disrupted by everything that's happened with COVID-19 and the town meeting. So what actually happened this week is we had that budget subcommittee meeting, and then based on that discussion in the budget sub, Peter and Dave shared what we just discussed tonight and voted on with the finance committee last night so that they could have a look at that and that could feed into their process. I think the finance committee reacted favorably to that proposal. And then the finance committee in Acton has scheduled its next meeting for a week from Wednesday so that they could finalize everything.
Thanks, John. Dave and Peter, is there anything to add from budget sub? I mean, John just covered it. Okay, so the statement of warrants and recommendation to approve there. If everyone has reviewed the warrants, I can say, I don't mind reading the motion. So I move that the school committee vote to approve payroll warrants as follows: number P2023 and the amount of $2,646,742.90. Payroll deduction warrant number 20-023PR in the amount of $529,811.49. Vendor warrant number 20-023 in the amount of $943,454.85. And student activity fund reimbursement number 20-023BL in the amount of $16,515.
So moved.
I moved. Yeah. So you see, I moved. So
I thought you were looking for someone to move.
No, I moved it.
Okay, second.
I seconded it. No, I seconded it.
Damn.
All right. Roll call vote. Michael.
Yes.
Ginny.
Yes.
John.
Yes.
Peter. Oh, sorry, Peter. Paul.
Yes.
Angie.
Yes.
Maya.
Yes.
Amy.
Yes.
Adam.
Yes, with gratitude.
And me. Yes. All right. That passes unanimously, Beth. All right. Peter, Do you have anything else to add?
No, I think we've gotten to just about everything that could possibly be covered in a night.
Okay, good. So I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Moved.
Second. I got it.
Everyone, Jimmy got it. Michael,
Yes.
Jimmy,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Paul,
Yes.
Angie,
Yes.
Maya,
Yes.
Amy,
Yes.
Adam.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, we are adjourned.
10:15, not bad.